let's put kind of highly secure air-gapped networks aside for a moment, okay, and just talk about, getting a USB to connect to a network. It's worth flagging that this is a really easy thing to do. So one thing that people will do, and this is not just nation states and whatnot, this is random, hackers that want to do things for the fun of it, can just drop a bunch of USB sticks in the parking lot of an organization, and someone will inevitably be naive enough to be like, oh no, someone has dropped this. Let's plug it in and see who this belongs to. And you're done. Now you're in, and you can spread in the internal network. This happens all the time. It's happened multiple times in multiple nuclear sites in the United States. So yeah, this is a pretty big deal.
That's unreal.
Hey listeners, Rob here. You were just listening to Sella Nevo from episode 195 on who's trying to steal frontier AI models and what they could do with them. Today we've got another compilation of great bits from the show, this time covering information and computer security, something that has come up many times because as guests are just about to explain and elaborate, it really does matter an awful lot. We've even got a preview of an upcoming episode that we thought would be out by this week, but has had to be held back while the paper it talks about receives some final tweaks. See if you can figure out which one that is. I really enjoyed, once again, listening back over these extracts and getting a reminder of how much funny and important prescient stuff has appeared on the show over the years. Coming up, we have Holden Karnofsky on why it is that information security could be the issue on which the future of humanity pivots. Tantum Collins on why infosec is the rare AI issue that unifies everyone. Nick Joseph on whether the current parlous state of information security makes it impossible to responsibly train an AGI. Nova DasSarma on the best available defenses against a really well-funded adversary. Sella Nevo on why AI model weights are so valuable to steal. Lennart Heim on the possibility of an autonomously replicating AI computer worm. Zvi Mowshowitz on the absurd lack of security mindset at some AI companies. Sella Nevo on the weaknesses of air-gapped networks and the risks posed by USB devices. Bruce Schneier on why it's bad to hook everything up to the internet. Nita Farahany on the possibility of hacking neural implants. Vitalik Buterin on how cybersecurity is the key to defense-dominant futures. Tom Davidson on just how dangerous secret loyalties and AI models could become. Carl Shulman on whether we should be worried about backdoors as governments adopt AI technology themselves. And finally, Allan Dafoe on backdooring your own artificial intelligence to prevent someone else from stealing it, or at least using it if they steal it. And there's another 10 or so extracts on top of those ones. If you'd like to learn more about impact-driven information security careers, then we've got an article on that on the 80,000 Hours website titled Information Security in High-Impact Areas. Probably best to just Google the title and 80,000 Hours to find that one. We've also got 91 InfoSec-related jobs listed on our job board at the moment, all the way from junior to senior positions. And you can set up email alerts to tell you whenever we add new ones that meet your specific requirements, so you never miss out and can apply straight away. You can find all that at jobs.80000hours.org. There's 825 opportunities in total listed on the job board at the moment, so plenty of other non-infosec stuff on there as well. All right, here's those 15 different guests on information and computer security.
Holden Karnofsky on why information security could be the issue on which the future of humanity pivots.
So this kind of worldview leads into something that you wrote, which is this kind of 4 intervention playbook for possible success with AI. And you kind of describe 4 different categories of interventions that we might engage in order to try to improve our odds of success. I think there was alignment research, standards and monitoring, creating a successful and careful AI lab, and finally information security. Yeah, we've been trying to get information security folks from AI labs on the show to talk about this, but understandably there's only so much that they want to divulge about the details of their work.
Right.
Why is information security potentially so key here?
I've done a lot of thinking of what are different ways the future could go well, and it's like there are some themes in them. It's like there's almost no story of the future going well that doesn't have like a part that's like, and no evil person steals the AI weights and goes and does evil stuff. And so, it has highlighted, I think the importance of security, the importance of just like information security, just like you're training a powerful AI system, you should make it hard for someone to steal, has like popped out to me as a thing that just like keeps coming up in these stories, keeps being present. It's hard to tell a story where it's not a factor. It's easy to tell a story where it is a factor. I mean, I think you can build these like powerful, dangerous AI systems, and you can do a lot to try to mitigate the dangers, like limiting the ways they can be used. You can do various alignment techniques, but if some state or someone else steals the weights, they've basically stolen your AI system, and they can run it without even having to do the training run. So you might spend a huge amount of money on a training run, end up with this AI system that's very powerful, and someone else just has it. And they can then also fine tune it, which means they can do their own training on it and kind of change the way it's operating. So whatever you did to train it to be nice, they can train that right out. The training they do could screw up whatever you did to try and make it aligned. And so it's I think if at the limit of like, it's really just trivial for any state to just grab your AI system and do whatever they want with it and retrain it how they want. It's really hard to imagine feeling really good about about that situation. I don't know if I really need to elaborate a lot more on that. And so making it harder seems valuable. I also, this is another thing where I want to say, as I have with everything else, that it's not a binary. So it could be the case that like after you improve your security a lot, it's still possible for a state actor to steal your system, but they have to take more risks. They have to spend more money. They have to take a deeper breath before they do it. It takes them more months. Months can be a very big deal. As I've been saying, when you get these very powerful systems, you could do a lot in a few months. By the time they steal it, you could have a better system. And so I don't think it's an all or nothing thing, but I think it's a core. It's no matter what risk of AI you're worried about. You could be worried about the misalignment. You could be worried about the misuse and the use to develop dangerous weapons. You could be worried about more esoteric stuff like how the AI does decision theory. You could be worried about, mind crime, but like you don't want just kind of like anyone, including some of these state actors who may have very bad values, to just be able to steal a system, retrain it how they want, and use it how they want. You want some kind of setup where it's like the people with good values controlling more of the more powerful AI systems, using them to enforce some sort of law and order in the world, and enforcing law and order generally with or without AI. So it seems quite robustly important. I think if you were to throw in a requirement with the license, I would make it about information security. So I think government requiring at least minimum security requirements of anyone training frontier models just seems like a good idea. Just like getting them on that ramp to where it's not so easy for a state actor to steal it. Arguably, government should just require all AI models to be treated as top secret classified information, which means that they would have to be subject to incredible draconian security requirements involving, just like air gap networks and all this incredibly painful stuff. Arguably, they should require that at this point, given how little we know about what these models are going to be imminently capable of. But at a minimum, some kind of security requirements seems good. I think other things about security is just like, I think it's very, very hard, like just very hard to make these systems hard to steal for a state actor. And so I think there's just like I think there's a ton of room to go and make things better. There could be security research on innovative new methods, and there can also just be like a lot of blocking and tackling, just getting companies to do things that we already know need to be done, but that are really hard to do in practice, take a lot of work, take a lot of iteration. And also a nice thing about security as opposed to some of these other things, it is a relatively mature field, so you can learn about security in some other context and then apply it to AI. So I think security is a really big deal. I think it hasn't gotten enough attention.
It is, it's a shame that more people haven't gone into it, because it does just seem like it's such an outstanding, it's like, even setting all of this aside, it seems like going into information security, computer security is a really outstanding career. It's the kind of thing that I would have loved to do in an alternative life, because it's kind of tractable and also exciting, really important things you can do. It's very, very well paid as well. Yeah,
I think the demand is crazily out ahead of the supply in security, which is another reason I wish more people had gone into it. And
So I'm basically totally on board with this line of argument. I guess if I had to push back, I'd say maybe we're just so far away from being able to secure these models that you could put in an enormous amount of effort, maybe like the greatest computer security effort that's ever been put towards any project, and maybe you would end up with it costing $1 billion in order to steal the model. But that's still peanuts to China or to state actors, and this is obviously going to be on their radar by the relevant time. So maybe really the message we should be pushing is, because we can't secure the models, we just have to not train them, and that's the only option here. Or perhaps you just need to move the entire training process inside the NSA building and basically just co-opt an existing, like whoever has the best security, you just basically take that and then use that as the shell for the training setup.
I don't think I understand either of these alternatives. I think we can come back to the $1 billion point, because I don't agree with that either.
Okay.
But let's start with this. Like, the only safe thing is not to train. I'm just like, how the heck would that make sense? Unless we get everyone in the world to agree with that forever. That doesn't seem like much of a plan. So I don't understand that one. I don't understand move inside the NSA building, because I'm like, if it's possible for the NSA to be secure, then it's probably possible for a company to be secure with a lot of effort. Like, it's like neither of these is making sense to me as an alternative. Yeah.
because they're two different arguments. So the NSA one, I suppose, would be saying it's going to be so hard to convert a tech company into being sufficiently secure that basically we just need to get the best people in the business wherever they are working on this problem, and basically you would have to like redesign it from the ground up.
Well, that might be what we have to do. I mean, a good step toward that would be for a lot of great people to be working in security, to determine that that's what has to happen, to be working at companies, to be doing the best they can, and say this is what we have to do. But let's try and be as adaptable as we can. I mean, it's like zero chance that the company would just literally become the NSA. They would figure out what the NSA is doing that they're not. They would do that, and they would make the adaptations they have to make. That would take an enormous amount of intelligence and creativity and person power. And the more security people there are, the better they would do it. So I don't know that one is really an alternative.
Okay, so and what about the argument that when we're not going to be able to get it to be secure enough, so it might even just give us like false comfort to be increasing the cost of stealing the model when it's still just going to be sufficiently cheap?
Well, I don't think it'll be false comfort. I mean, I think if you have a zillion great security people and they're all like, FYI, this thing is not safe, I think we're probably going to feel less secure than we do now when we just I think have a lot of confusion and FUD about exactly how hard it is to protect a model. So I don't know. Like I kind of like what's the alternative, but putting aside what's the alternative, I would just disagree with this thing that it's $1 billion and it's peanuts. I would just say, look, at the point where it's really hard, anything that's really hard, there's an opportunity for people to screw it up.
Sometimes it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. And they might not be able to pull it off. They might just screw it up a bunch of times. That might give us enough months to have enough of an edge that it doesn't matter. I think another point in all this is like, if we get to a future world where you have a really good standards and monitoring regime, one of the things you're monitoring for could be security breaches. So you could be saying, hey, we're using AI systems to enforce some sort of regulatory regime that says you can't train a dangerous system. Well, not only can't you train a dangerous system, you can't steal any system. If we catch you, there's going to be consequences for that. And those consequences could be arbitrarily large. And it's one thing to say a state actor can steal your AI. It's another thing to say they can steal your AI without a risk of getting caught. These are different security levels. So I guess there's a hypothetical world in which no matter what your security is, a state actor can easily steal it in a week without getting caught. But I actually doubt we're in that world. I think you make it harder than that. And I think that's worth it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've knocked it out of the park in terms of failing to disprove this argument that I agree with. So please, people, go and learn more about this. We've got an information security career review. There's post up on the Effective Altruism forum called EA Infosec: Skill Up or Make a Transition to Infosec via this book club, which you could go check out. There's also the EA Infosec Facebook group. So quite a lot of resources. As hopefully, finally, people are waking up to this as a really impactful career.
This is a lot of different jobs, by the way. There's security researchers, there's security engineers, there's security, DevOps people and managers, and just, this is a big thing. We've oversimplified it. And I'm not an expert at all.
Tantum Collins on why information security is a rare AI issue that unifies everyone.
One other suggestion I've heard for something that should be viewed as good by the likes of many of these different interest groups is cybersecurity. So it seems cybersecurity looks really good from a national security point of view, because you really don't want dangerous technology leaking out to terrorists or to adversary states potentially. It's really good from an extinction risk point of view. But I would guess that most people either think that that's really good or at worst neutral. So that seems like one where you could potentially build quite a broad coalition around requiring extremely high cybersecurity for frontier AI models potentially.
Yeah, I think it's totally right, actually. Yeah, I agree with that. I guess there's like a long list of sort of AI application areas that almost nobody would say are bad. So for instance, using AI to help develop cures for like really dangerous diseases, using AI to improve like cyber defenses, stuff like that. But I think that's maybe like a slightly different level of abstraction than sort of like the category of policies that we're talking about.
Well, I guess improving the methods that we have for keeping models on track in terms of what goals they're pursuing and why, as they become substantially more capable, that is kind of one of the main thrusts of the extinction-focused work that I think that at least NatSec people would also think is probably good. And I would think that AI ethics people would also think is probably good. I guess I don't know of anyone who really objects to that line of research. At worst, they might think it's a bit of a waste of resources or something if they don't think it's promising.
Yeah, I think that's right. Maybe another one that would be interesting is sort of improvements to privacy-preserving machine learning infrastructure and techniques. So these are techniques like differential privacy, homomorphic encryption, secure multi-party computation, and federated learning that give you some level of privacy guarantee about saying you can train a model on data in ways that don't have to give the model owner repeatable, interpretable access to the data, nor give the data owner repeatable, interpretable access to the model, but still you get the benefits of like model improvement at the end of the day. And historically, these have usually had a sort of like big additional cost computationally. There are some interesting groups, most notably OpenMind, which is an open source community that is developing a library called PySift that is trying to sort of reduce the computational cost of those systems. There are a lot of areas where we would like to have the sort of public benefits of stuff that is trained on sensitive data, but we don't want to compromise individuals' personal information. So some of the most obvious ones here are medical use cases, where it would be great to have systems that are trained on the distributed, let's say, mammography data in order to improve tumor detection. But completely understandably, people don't want to hand their sensitive healthcare information over to for-profit companies. There are also a whole bunch of other applications, including actually model governance itself, and like how can you deploy systems that will assess the capabilities of certain models or the size of training runs or what have you without getting any other sort of creepy surveillance data from that stuff. So there is a whole world of possibilities in this direction that could be helpful for developing models that would have to be trained on sensitive data and or handling governance responsibilities that might otherwise bring surveillance implications that make us uncomfortable. I think that is a technical stack that is under development now, but where lots more work could be done. And the overwhelming majority of the use cases that it enables, at least the ones that like I have come across, are quite positive. So that might be another area that there would be like shared interest in developing.
Nick Joseph on whether the current state of information security makes it impossible to responsibly train AGI.
If I think about how this is most likely to play out, I imagine that at the point that we do have models that we really want to protect from even the best state-based hackers, there probably have been some progress in computer security, but like not nearly enough to make you or me feel comfortable that there's just no way that, you know, China or Russia might be able to steal the model weights. And so like it is very plausible that the RSP will say, Anthropic, well, you have to, you know, keep this on a hard disk, not connected to any computer. You can't train models that are more capable than the thing that we kind of already have that we don't feel comfortable handling. And then how does that play out over, you know, there are a lot of people who are very concerned about safety at Anthropic. I mean, I've seen that there's kind of league tables now of, you know, different AI companies and enterprises, and, you know, how good do they look on an AI safety point of view? And, you know, Anthropic always kind of comes out at the top, I think, by a decent margin. But, you know, months go by, other companies are not being as careful as this. You've complained to the government and you've said, look at this horrible situation that we're in. Can't you? Something has to be done. But I don't know. I guess possibly the government could step in and help there, but maybe they won't. And then over a period of months or years, doesn't the choice effectively become, if there is no solution, either take the risk or just be rendered irrelevant?
Yeah, so I maybe just going back to the beginning of that, like, I don't think we will put something in that it says there is zero risk from something. Like, I think you can sort of never get to zero risk. I think often with security, you'll end up with some security productivity trade-off. So you could end up taking some really extreme risk, you know, or some really extreme security productivity trade-off where only one person has access to this. Maybe you've like locked it down in some huge amount of ways. It's possible that you can't even do that. You really just can't train the model. But there is always going to be some sort of balance there. And I don't think we'll push to the zero risk perspective. But yeah, I think that's just like a risk. I don't know. I think there's a lot of risks that companies face where they could fail, right? We also could just like fail to make better models and run not succeed that way. I think the point of the RSP is it has like tied our commercial success to the safety mitigations. So in some ways, it just adds on another risk in the same way as any other company risk.
It sounds like I'm having a go at you here, but I think what this shows up is just that I think that the scenario that I painted there is really quite plausible, and it just shows that this problem cannot be solved by Anthropic. Probably, like, it can't be solved by even all of the AI companies combined. The only way that this RSP is actually going to be able to be usable, in my estimation, is if other people rise to the occasion and pitch, and governments actually do the work necessary to fund the, you know, solutions to computer security that will allow us to have the model weights be sufficiently secure in this situation. And yeah, that you're not blameworthy for that situation. It just says that there's a lot of people who need to do a lot of work in coming years.
I think I might be more optimistic than you or something. I do think if we get to something really dangerous, we can make a very clear case that it's dangerous and like these are the risks unless we can implement these mitigations. Like I hope that like at that point it will be a much clearer case to pause or something right now. I think there are many people who are like, we should pause right now and see everyone saying no. And they're like, oh, these people don't care. They don't care about like major risks to humanity. And I think really the core thing is people don't believe there are risks to humanity right now. And once we get to like this sort of stage, I think that we will be able to make those risks very clear, very like immediate, tangible, and like, I don't know. No one wants to be the company that like caused a massive disaster. And no government also probably wants to have like allowed a company to cause that. You know, like it will feel much more immediate at that point.
A metaphor that you use within your responsible scaling policy is putting together an aeroplane while you're flying it. I think that is one way that the challenge is particularly difficult for the industry and for Anthropic. That's unlike with biology safety levels where basically we know the diseases that we're handling and we know how bad they are and we know how they spread and things like that. You know, the people who are figuring out what should BSL level 4 security be like can look at lots of studies to understand exactly the organisms that already exist and how they would spread and how likely would they be to escape given these particular ventilation systems and so on. And even then, they mess things up decently often. But in this case, you're dealing with something that doesn't exist that we're not even sure like when it will exist or what it will look like. And you're developing the thing at the same time that you're trying to figure out how to make it safe. It's just extremely difficult. And I guess, and we should expect mistakes. We should, that's something that we should keep in mind, is that even if people who are doing their absolute best here are likely to mess up, and that's a reason why we need this defense in depth strategy that you're talking about, that we don't want to put all of our eggs in the RSP basket. We want to have like many different layers ideally.
Yeah, it's also like a reason to start early. So like I think one of the things with Claude 3 was, we that was sort of the first model where we really ran this whole process. And I think some part of me felt like, wow, this is kind of silly. Like I was pretty confident Claude 3 was not catastrophically dangerous. It was like slightly better than GPT-4, which had been out for a long time and not caused a catastrophe. But I do think that like the process of doing that, learning what we can, and then putting out like public statements about how it went, what we learned, is the way that we can have this run really smoothly on the next time. And like we can make mistakes now, right? Like we could have made a ton of mistakes because the stakes are pretty low at the moment. But in the future, the stakes on this will be really high, and it will be really costly to make mistakes. So it's important to get those practice runs in.
Nova DasSarma on the best available defenses against well-funded adversaries.
So my perception as someone who takes a slight amateur interest in information security issues is that the state of the art is very bad and that we do not really have reliable ways of stopping people stopping a really advanced, well-funded adversary from stealing data if this is something that they're willing to invest a lot of human capital in. Is that kind of right?
I think that's kind of right. I've got a story here if you want to hear it.
Yeah, go for it.
Around this. A state that will not be named had an attack that was in the news recently that was a zero-click vulnerability on iMessage. And so a zero-click vulnerability being one where the user doesn't have to take any actions for them to be compromised. And this had to do with something called the JBig2 compression algorithm, which you might have heard about because back in the day, Xerox used to use this for copiers, and it's a compression algorithm, which means that you can copy things faster. But it turns out that if you turn the compression up too high, it turns zeros to nines and vice versa, which is quite bad for numerics. That being said, JBig2 was also the culprit in this case, where their compression algorithm is dynamic, which means that you can specify patterns on the fly. And it turns out that if you construct a file that has the JBig2 codec in it, then you can construct gates out of this, so logical gates, which means that in theory, it's Turing complete. And in practice, it was Turing complete. And so to deliver this vulnerability, they produced a computer within the JBig2 decompression algorithm to deliver the payload to these phones. And that's the sort of thing where you could theoretically have defended against this, but the way that you defended against this was least access, so not being able to access anything on your phones, or not having phones. Both of these things are really quite difficult to implement in an organization above a certain size that doesn't have a very, very strong security mindset.
Security culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So that's like on the state access side. That being said, the thing that works the most is always going to be a social attack. So something where you meet someone at a party and they seem nice and they become your friend, and then you let them into your building when you maybe shouldn't have done that, and they plug a USB into your system and you're done. We talk about physical access being the end of the line in security oftentimes.
Right. We basically live in a world where states are able to figure out completely new ways of breaking into computers, into phones, that people can't protect against because no one else is aware of them, and potentially they can require no action whatsoever. I suppose even more accessible to actors who have less money is this kind of social engineering attacks where they'll convince someone to give them access, and this doesn't require quite the same level of technical chops. But nonetheless, basically, it's extremely hard to secure a system to be very confident that it's not vulnerable to one or the other of these approaches.
For sure. And I mean, on the social engineering side, you don't need the folks who have the most access in your organization to be compromised by social engineering attacks. Oftentimes, those are the folks who are least vulnerable to that. All you need to do is have somebody who is, on operations, or somebody who is maybe even the physical security person for the building who connects to your corporate Wi-Fi, be compromised, and then they can be the threat vector into your organization. Yeah.
So given that we live in that kind of world, should we just not be training models that we don't want to leak, or where it would be disastrous if they leaked? It seems like we just don't live in a world that's safe for that kind of ML model yet.
For sure. And I think that's definitely something that a lot of labs would definitely have on their minds. I think that it being difficult to secure models is one of the reasons why we wouldn't want to train such models. I think that models with a lot of capabilities are oftentimes very alluring for people to build anyways, though. And so my perspective on this is that it's important for me and people who I work with to develop tools to defend things anyways. Because if you can detect, if you can disrupt that sort of attack while it's happening, if you can notice it's happening, then you've got a better chance of keeping things contained longer.
Yeah. Coming back to the preventability, I guess you're just saying, given the current state of information security, that in order to keep this information secret, they would have to bury it so deeply that it would interfere with their operations more than it would even be worth in terms of protecting the information. And so basically we should just expect, like, if a piece of information is this valuable and this obvious, we should often expect it to be stolen one way or another.
I think that's a good expectation to have. It might not be what actually happens. I wouldn't give, greater than 50% on a 1-year timeline of, like, for example, Hafafnir's CTL command being stolen. But it's a good mindset to have. It makes you think more carefully about what sorts of capabilities you're developing and things like that. Because if you assume that a bad actor is going to use it, then you're going to be in a better state if they do actually end up using it.
Okay, so to what degree could we solve any of these information security issues by, like, putting information that we don't want to get out there on ice somehow, like putting things in cold storage, except for, like, the exceptional cases where occasionally you want to access them for some practical reason?
I highly recommend it. Yeah. I think that certainly limiting the amount of information you have that is eligible to be exploited and that is easily accessible is a great way to limit your footprint. So things like, if you've got a model that you trained and you have a whole bunch of checkpoints and you're storing them on some online system, consider whether you need to do that. Consider whether you could instead encrypt those and put them on something like Amazon Glacier or Google Snowball or something like that, where you've got a cold storage, it's going to take several hours to restore it, and you can absolutely set an alarm if somebody tries to restore that information without letting you know.
Yeah. Interesting. What are some of the most secure networks that exist today, or most secure, like, computer systems that exist?
Well, I think that my TI-84 Plus calculator is pretty secure because it can't connect. I think it's hard for me to comment really on the security of other organizations. I think that everyone's trying very, very hard to produce systems that are secure and reliable because that's very much important for their bottom line.
Sella Nevo on why AI model weights are so valuable to steal.
The work that we did over the past year focused specifically on the confidentiality of the weights, which is a way of saying we want to make sure that the model weights are not stolen. And the reason we decided to at least start there is because the model weights represent kind of a unique culmination of many different costly prerequisites for training advanced models. So To be able to produce these model weights, you need significant compute. It was estimated that GPT-4 costs $78 million and thousands of GPU years. Gemini Ultra cost nearly $200 million, and these costs are continuing to rise rapidly. A second thing you need is enormous amounts of training data. It's been rumored to be more than 10 terabytes of training data for GPT-4. You need all those algorithmic improvements and optimizations that are used during training that you mentioned. So if you can access the weights directly, you bypass at least hundreds of millions of dollars, and probably in practice a lot more that comes with talent and infrastructure and things like that are not counted in the direct training cost. But on the other hand, as soon as you have the weights, computing inference from a large language model is, usually less than half a cent per 1,000 tokens. So these costs are, there's still some compute involved, but it's negligible. There are other things you need, maybe you need to know the exact architecture, and you can't always fully infer that from the weights. Obviously, you need to have some machine learning understanding to kind of be able to deploy this. But these are all fairly small potatoes relative to, being able to produce the weights yourself. So there's a lot of value in kind of getting to those weights. And critically, once you do that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So, a lot of other defenses that labs may have in place no longer apply. So if there's monitoring over the API to make sure you're not doing things you're not supposed to, that no longer matters because you're running it independently. If there are guardrails that are kind of trained into the model to prevent it from doing something, we know you can kind of fine-tune those away, and so those don't really matter. Right. So really there's almost nothing to stop an actor from being able to abuse the model once they have access to the weights.
Is there value limited by the fact that once you've kind of got the model weights, that model will soon be surpassed by kind of the next generation of frontier models?
I think that really depends what the attacker wants to use them for, or what you as the defender are worried about. If we're thinking about this kind of like global strategic competition considerations, which countries will have the most capable models for let's say economic development, for economic progress and things like that, then I think that's relevant. Still, stealing the models might give an attacker, years of advantage relative to where they would have been otherwise. I'm most concerned about just the abuse of these models to do something terrible. So if we were to evaluate a model and know that you can use it to do something terrible, I don't really care that, the company a few months later is even more capable. Still, someone can abuse it to do something terrible.
Kevin Esvelt on what cryptographers can teach biosecurity experts.
I've been spending, due to my efforts on DNA synthesis screening, I've been spending a lot of time with cryptographers. And this is an area of cultural conflict between biosecurity and cybersecurity. Cryptographers in particular make a number of assumptions going into their work. They say, assume there is an adversary, assume the adversary is smarter than you, better resourced than you, and is operating in the future with the benefit of technologies and advances that you don't know and can't imagine. And of course, they've had the opportunity to look at your defenses after you construct them. So, design accordingly.
That's a pretty different approach to my impression of the way biologists are thinking about this.
And even biosecurity people, which again, I sort of use that. This is a nascent field, but come on, still struggling to maybe we should require DNA synthesis screening at all. Never mind ensure that it actually is up to date and verifiable. And what about questions of information hazards? Maybe we shouldn't disclose everything that we're screening because both the adversary can use it against us and evade it. And maybe you shouldn't have the screening criteria on a device. Maybe. These are all like much more advanced questions where perhaps understandably most people in the field are just focused on, but we haven't even gotten screening at all. And my point is, but if any teenage malcontent can get a hold of your software or one device off of eBay and then endlessly interrogate your screening criteria and then write a quick algorithm that can convert anyone's DNA sequence into something that will evade screening, thereby they've just negated your entire effort like that. So what's the point unless you have to think at least a little bit about how to do it right. You have to think more than just the next step. And what's more, you need technical advances in order to meet those other goals. So if you're doing technical research on what you need, then you should think about those later steps and try to learn from those disciplines. I've often said, after working with the cryptographers and infosec folks for years, I now have the security mindset of about a 3-year-old toddler compared to them.
Wow. Oh dear.
But anyway, even my 3-year-old toddler self can say, you really don't want to rely on our expectations and genetic engineering detection and similar algorithms to be reliable against a sophisticated adversary, if there is one.
Lennart Heim on the possibility of an autonomously replicating AI computer worm.
So we've been talking a little bit about like my nightmares and my bad dreams and like where Rob's imagination goes when he imagines how this is all going to play out. Maybe let's talk about another one of these that I've been mulling over recently as I've been reading a lot about AI and seeing what capabilities are coming online. This time a bit more related to computer security specifically. So I basically am describing a computer worm, which I think our youngest listeners might not really have that much exposure to computer worms. But from, I understand, the early days of the internet through and like networking computers through to about the period of Windows Vista, this was a regular occurrence where basically people would find some vulnerability within an operating system or sometimes within like email software that would basically allow you to break into a computer, then email everyone with a copy of the virus, and then it would spread to other computers until basically everything was shut down, just in a cacophony of people passing this malware or this virus between all of their computers. You could Google this question of like the largest computer worms or the largest outbreaks. I remember when I was a kid, there was a handful of times that enormous numbers of computers went down basically for a day or two until these vulnerabilities could be patched. You would have just companies completely inoperable, more or less, because their computer systems had been infected with these worms. I think that stopped more or less because computer security got better. It's still very bad, but it was so bad then that it's not so easy. There's now a lot more fire breaks that make it hard to put together all of the security vulnerabilities that you need for a worm like that to operate. Yeah. So why could this come back? In the worm case, it was just a person or a group that programmed this tiny piece of software to use just a handful of vulnerabilities, or maybe just a single vulnerability, in order to break into these computer systems one after another in a kind of exponential growth situation. In this new world, we're imagining a program, an ML system that is extremely good at doing security research, more or less, and discovering like all kinds of different vulnerabilities. It basically has all of the knowledge that one might need in order to be an incredibly effective hacker. And so it's going to just keep finding new vulnerabilities that it can use. So you shut it down from one avenue, and then it's like discovered something else, and it's copying itself using this other mechanism. And potentially it could also self-modify in order to obfuscate its existence or obfuscate its presence on a computer system. So it's quite hard to clear it out. So it can kind of lie idle for a very long time using very little compute, and then come to life again and copy itself elsewhere using some new zero-day exploit, so some new as yet unknown computer vulnerability that is picked up in the meantime. Okay, so it seems like serious people worry that something along these lines could happen. I think, jokers have already tried doing this with existing language models. Of course, they don't have the capabilities required to simply pull this off. It's not simple. So it actually hasn't happened. But if the capabilities got to a sufficiently high level, then this could be something that we could observe.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's computer security is like, worst nightmares, these kinds of things. Like, having like thought a bit and like worked in information security, I was like, yep. Information security is like pretty bad. There's definitely different companies with different standards there, right? And like, as you just described, like back in the days, it used to really be like the Wild Western, where like some literally kids were able to take down MySpace because just like they found some bugs, right? Yeah. And then this thing was like self-replicating. What do we do about this?
Well, I mean, it seems like the most realistic way to defend against this is that you would expect that the white hat people would have a larger budget than pranksters or terrorists or just ne'er-do-wells that are doing this. And so why didn't Google train the hacking model first and then use that to detect all the vulnerabilities that this model could possibly find and then patch them all?
Indeed.
I think the way that this could have legs is, well, firstly, it might just be that no one's on the ball, and so no one produces this ML hacking model for benevolent purposes first. So it might be that the bad people have this idea and put it into operation before like the necessary security work has been done on the other side. It might also just be that it's easier to, you might have an offense advantage here where they only have to find one vulnerability, whereas you have to patch everything. And even if even if you have a security model that can discover the vulnerabilities, in fact, patching them might be a hell of a lot of work in many cases. It's just there aren't enough system operators in the entire world to do all of the necessary software updates. So anyway, it might be a danger during this kind of intermediate stage. Is there anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, maybe there are like two different notions we should like try to disentangle here. I think there's one idea, just like you have like the system, like this like AI system, which is like self-replicating and going around, right? And the best way to defend against this is just like you train the system ideally on an air-gapped server, so systems which are not connected to the internet, and you try to evaluate it there for these dangerous and self-replicating capabilities. And if they have it, well, please don't deploy it. This is the first thing. Another notion we can just talk about, like, well, you can use these models as to help you coding, and they help you to produce like new malware, right? And then we just basically describe, well, it's going from server to server and it's doing X. Really depends what X is and how would you like eventually detect it. And like, yeah, like a AI system self-replicating going from place to like acquire more copies of itself, I think is a completely something different than just like a malware going around, because this is already the case, which we see a lot of times, right? We just expect like to be like these offender capabilities and like these script kiddie capabilities to some degree just become like significantly better in the near future to do this. But yeah, like for these AI systems, that's why we need like these capabilities evals. Just like people should like really check, do these systems have the idea on like some ways to self-replicate? And I expect this to not come like immediately from one system to the other, just like wherever like, cool, maybe certain systems can theoretically do it, right? You can like basically like talk to them and like get them to do it over time. And in the future, they might do it on their own. But like we will see like some prompts and ways, like some signs of this previously where we should like be really careful. But this whole idea of having air-gapped servers really helps there. I think one of the first things you can do with AI systems you don't understand is deploy them on the internet. This seems really, really bad. The internet is just a wild western. And also just defend our critical infrastructure against the internet. Just don't hook everything up to the internet. Just like, it's a bad idea.
I've been just banging my head against walls for the last 5 years, watching everything get connected to the internet. And it's like, this is a completely centralized failure node now for everything, for the water, for electricity, for our cars. I think just based on common sense, given how bad computer security is, this has been a foolish move. There are benefits, but we've just been completely reckless, I think, in the way that we've connected essential services to the internet. I mean, at least so far as I understand it, we haven't connected the nukes to the internet. But that seems to be almost the only thing that we haven't decided to make vulnerable.
Yeah, at least we agree on this one. This seems really good. Yeah, but like everything else, just like it seems really bad. And I think we have not seen a worst yet because nobody deployed the capability yet. But you can expect most nation states to sit in each other's critical infrastructure. If they want to, they can pull the plug. And for some reason, they don't do it. Not for some reason, like it makes sense to not do it, but like if they want to do it, they could pull it. And then we have AI systems doing this. This is definitely not great. There are like some things which just like simply not be connected to the internet. Yeah, it's like funny enough, like as a technical guy, I've always been the one who's like, please let's not hook it up to the internet. Like this idea of Internet of Things is like, don't get me wrong, it seems great. It's a lot of fun having like all of this fancy blue lights in your room. But
we're just going to lose all electronics simultaneously in a worst case scenario where someone sufficiently malicious or an agent that's sufficiently malicious is interested in basically shutting down society. And I mean, people would starve en masse. Is the outcome of the way that we've set things up.
And we see this right now already with just like companies where like ransomwares are getting deployed, right? Where like just like whole companies are not, like we had this in our hospitals. Yeah. But like lucky enough, like some ransomware is like, oh sorry guys, like we were only meant to target like financial corporations, not your hospitals. Here's the encryption key, but like sorry for taking off your whole network for a month or for a week or something. They're like, not defended. Yeah, nobody's on the ball on cybersecurity. I feel pretty confident on this one statement. Some people just way more than others. Yeah. But it just goes hand in hand with AI systems. Yeah. If we don't figure this one out, and maybe we should leverage it in the meanwhile to make more systems secure. And if we can't, just let's not hook it up to the internet. That would be great.
I think unfortunately we've just completely lost on that one. I don't know. They're not hooking up to the internet. There's almost nothing left.
I think there's like some critical infrastructure where we just don't do it, or there's like some way. I feel like I would expect some power facilities not being hooked up with the internet, but maybe I'm just wrong and naive there, and like maybe too optimistic.
I think this raises an entire intervention class that I haven't seen discussed very much among AI X risk or AI existential risk folks, which is just maybe a very valuable thing to do is to start a business, a computer security business that uses ML models to find vulnerabilities and alert people and try to get them to patch it, to try to get as much of a lead as you possibly can on just improving computer security in general against this broad threat of this new way that people can try to identify and take advantage of vulnerabilities.
Ideally, the AI labs would do it.
Right.
My colleague Marcus had this idea of just like that. There needs to be some responsible disclosure where it's like, hey, we're an AI lab, we developed this system. Hello, society. There are these vulnerabilities. I think the system might be able to exploit it. We can only deploy the system if we patch these vulnerabilities, which we know the system can like exploit for sure. Otherwise, we should not deploy the system, right?
I mean, yeah. Well, so one model that has better incentives might be that they have to notify people about all of these ways that it could harm those folks, or that their systems are vulnerable to it, and then they say, well, we're going to deploy this in a month, so you've got a month to fix this, or you've got 6 months, or whatever it is.
Ideally, you have more time, and ideally you can also say no. It's like, oh gosh, like you guys, like you better, you're not alone. There are like still other people who like eventually decide. Eventually, it's up to like governments and democracies to decide what gets deployed.
Yeah, I mean, currently, if people don't patch their computers, mostly that harms them because maybe their money will be stolen or their data is going to be stolen.
I mean, there's a harm to society, right? There's just like insurances for these kinds of stuff, and just like
the direction I was going was saying like right now. Like I bear most of the cost, but in this new world where compute can be used for hostile purposes, it becomes a whole societal issue if people aren't patching their servers or people's servers are vulnerable, such that it may be necessary to have much more serious regulation about saying it's unacceptable to have this like large amounts of compute hooked up to the internet that are vulnerable to infiltration. It's just a threat to all. So
I think so. I think in general, like one just good policy is just like data centers should have certain security norms. It's that simple. And like certain security norms regarding physical access and certain security norms just regarding cyber physical access for these kinds of systems.
And they have to have add a red button.
Ideally the red button. We have to be a bit careful there about the design again. It's dual use again. Maybe the wrong people push the wrong red button, right? Also the AI system could do it. But maybe that's the thing we eventually wanted, where just like this red button is in this case favorable because there are like less copies or so. But yeah, there should be more explored in more detail to which degree this is good. But like having some fail-safe switch for these kinds of systems where you see like, oh my God, this AI system's going haywire. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. I guess so one thing is just to turn off the system. Another thing that the red button could do, or I suppose, I don't know, I guess it's the yellow button next to the red button.
It's called a yellow button.
Yellow button, I think at the moment it probably takes quite a bit of work to basically start up an entire like set of compute and to reset it basically back to factory settings or reset it back to some known safe like pre-infection setting and then turn it back on again. Maybe that needs to be much more automated so that basically you press this yellow button and the whole thing like goes through some process of like clearing out everything and basically resetting something from previous known safe state, because that reduces the cost to doing it because you're not denying people access to their email.
But eventually there's still some cost, right? And like that's the whole idea where we have like these power supplies and just like these batteries in these data centers. If you run out of power, you never want your system shut down because you just lose data, right? So like first they run off the battery, and if they still don't get power back by then, they turn on their generators to generate their own power. So like these things are like right now optimized to just like always stay up, have like the uptime up, right? And like we need some innovations there where we can just like try to think about these things. In particular, like a bunch of the things we're now talking about like are pretty speculative, just like AI systems, self-replicating, going over data center to data center, or even malwares. And I think they're like this is a fail-safe. There are like a bunch of interventions in between where we can just detect this, and just like monitoring is just the first idea. Just knowing what's going on in your data centers, what's going in and what's going out, and what is using your compute.
Yeah.
Information security, computer security, big thing. Please work on this. I think recently there was actually published a career review on this. So this seems to be a great thing to take a look at and work on this. And there are like more people trying to do this. Work at the labs. Once we got the lab secure, we also need to secure people like me and others, because we also work with more and more confidential information. That seems important. And make the computer secure, make the lab secure, and also make the AI governance people secure.
Yeah.
Zvi Mowshowitz on the absurd lack of security mindset at some AI companies.
What went badly, in your view, in 2023?
Meta's statement they're going to literally build AGI and then just give it to everybody, open model weights, with no thought to what that might mean. I don't think they mean it. Manifold Markets does not seem to think that they mean it when I ask the question. But it's a really, really bad thing to say out loud. Mistral seeming to be able to produce halfway decent models with their attitude of damn the torpedoes is an L. The fact that their model got leaked against their will, even, is also an L. I mean, it's kind of insane that happened this week, right? Like their Mistral Medium model, it seems, at least some form of it, got leaked out onto the internet when they didn't intend this. And their response was, oh, an overeager employee of an early access customer did this. Whoops. Which is exactly, think about the level of security mindset that you have for that statement to come out of the CEO's mouth on Twitter, right? And like, you're just not taking this seriously. Oh, whoops. I guess we didn't mean to open source that one for a few more weeks. No, you are counting on every employee of every customer not to leak the model weights. You're insane. Like, can we please think about this for 5 minutes and hire someone? God.
Sella Nevo on the weaknesses of air-gapped networks and the risks of USB devices.
There are quite a few different ways to still get into an air-gapped network. So the first thing maybe that's worth noting is that just because you're not connected by a network doesn't mean your system doesn't interact with the rest of the world in other ways. So usually, if you're not connected to the internet via a network connection, let's say an Ethernet connection, you still need to communicate in some other ways. How do you get your security updates?
Right.
How do you bring in, let's say in the AI context, how do you bring in training data? How do you take out the models that you've trained after you've trained them in such a secure system?
Yep.
Often the way you do that is through USB sticks. Okay, that's kind of the most common way that people interact with air-gapped networks. So what you could do, or what an attacker could do, is run malware that copies itself from a computer. It infects originally on a computer on the outside that is connected to the internet, maybe like one of the engineers that work with the system. That malware copies itself into the USB stick. And once you plug in the USB stick into the air-gapped network, it then copies itself into the computer, then does whatever it wants inside this air-gapped network. And then the next time they plug in a USB stick, that malware sends out the information through the USB sticks that it wants to exfiltrate. For example, the weights.
That's terrible. That seems like it really defeats the point of an air-gapped network. Why? It just seems like a huge flaw. Is the situation better than that?
I mean, I think it's a slightly, I'd give it a slightly less harsh review, which is, it does make things a lot harder. So it is a pain in the ass to write malware that can do all of this. It is maybe, as opposed to having a continuous connection to the computer, you kind of like are limited by these like occasional interactions and things like that. So I think it's definitely better to have an air-gapped network than to have your computer connected to the internet. But I mean, it's definitely not impenetrable. So yeah. Okay.
So it is, it's still an improvement. And so it's good and worth doing, but this is an insecure, or like a vulnerability. Are there real world examples of this kind of malware being installed through a USB?
Yeah, this has happened many times. One minor thing to say, the fact that you use a USB stick is not in and of itself in information security a vulnerability, because allegedly the fact that you stick a USB stick doesn't mean they should be able to run code. Allegedly, you should be able to look at the content of the USB, and code that you never intended to run is not supposed to be able to be run. But again, as with everywhere else, there are vulnerabilities. USB sticks are actually a great candidate because they're kind of a pretty complex protocol. And, when you plug it in, sometimes the thing will pop up. It'll ask you, what do you want to happen when you plug this in? That is always an indication that, okay, some things are happening automatically. So that can potentially be abused. So again, in a perfect world, it wouldn't be able to do that, but we have to be sufficiently paranoid because we've seen many times that it happens. Let's put kind of highly secure air-gapped networks aside for a moment, okay, and just talk about, getting a USB to connect to a network. It's worth flagging that this is a really easy thing to do. So one thing that people will do, and this is not just nation states and whatnot, this is random, hackers that want to do things for the fun of it, can just drop a bunch of USB sticks in the parking lot of an organization, and someone will inevitably be naive enough to be like, oh no, someone has dropped this. Let's plug it in and see who this belongs to. And you're done. Now you're in, and you can spread in the internal network. This happens all the time. It's happened multiple times in multiple nuclear sites in the United States. So yeah, this is a pretty big deal.
That's unreal.
Now, I think that many people like you will find that surprising. I think folks who are like security folks are kind of like being like, oh, well, I mean, no one would, everyone in security knows that you shouldn't plug in a
Shouldn't
USB stick.
pick up a USB stick, yeah.
But let me challenge even those folks who think that this is obvious, and also in that way bring it back to kind of the more secure networks we were talking about before. So indeed, like organizations with serious security know not to plug in random USB sticks.
Yep.
But what about USB cables? So Louisa, let me ask you actually. So if you needed a USB cable and you just like saw one in the hallway or something,
100% I would use it.
Would you use it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure I've literally already done that.
So here's an interesting fact, which I think even most security folks don't know. So you could actually buy a USB cable, not a USB stick, a USB cable for $180 that is hiding a USB stick inside and can communicate wirelessly back home. So once you stick that cable in, an attacker can now control your system from far, not even in the mode that I mentioned before of like, oh, you wait until the USB stick will be put in again. It just continuously can communicate with and control your system. I guarantee you that if you toss that cable into a tech organization's cables shelf, I guarantee it'll be plugged in.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's really crazy. Yeah, has that been used in the real world?
I mean, I don't know. There's a company that's selling them, so I don't know if I haven't seen reports of when it's been used, but presumably if it's a product on the market, someone is buying it.
Bruce Schneier and why it's bad to hook everything up to the internet.
My hope is that we can have computers working alongside humans in some of these areas. I mean, a bunch of reasons why this will, I think, make a big difference. Attacks happen at computer speeds. Defense often happens at human speeds. That's kind of not fair. The more defense that can happen at computer speeds, I think the better off we'll be. Some aspects of computer security, like vulnerability finding, seem really ripe for mechanization. And you can have machine learning systems find vulnerabilities, which would do an enormous amount of good, because a lot of our vulnerabilities stem from the fact that there are vulnerabilities in the software, because we're terrible at writing secure code. We have no idea how to do it. And if computers can find vulnerabilities, well, it benefits the attacker and the defender, of course. But if you think about it, once you have this automatic system, you build it into the compilers and code generation tools, and suddenly vulnerabilities are a thing of the past. And that's actually possible 5, 10, 20 years. And that would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I guess I've heard some people worry that we're going to have a computer security apocalypse, basically, because we'll, design ML algorithms that can find weaknesses and sort of like find computer bugs and like security weaknesses incredibly quickly. But I guess you're saying, well, maybe in the short run that does look bad because, potentially like some with bad intentions will get that early on. But in the longer term, that's actually a more generalized solution, because if you can just run these algorithms against every piece of software and then patch all the bugs, then we end up in a better place.
Right, and that's where the defender has wins here, right? The attacker finds a vulnerability
because they can do it before they release it.
Yeah. Right. The defender finds it and fixes it and no longer exists. You have this very bad intermediate time when the vulnerabilities are found in everything that exists today. And there you're going to see systems that monitor these insecure systems that know those vulnerabilities because they found them too, watches them from being used and sort of, destroys them in the network.
Yeah.
So you'll see solutions like that. But then the end game is vulnerabilities are a thing of the past. So we could have this podcast 20 years from now and you can ask me, wow, remember 20 years ago when software vulnerabilities were a thing? Wasn't that a crazy time?
Wow,
it's great that we're past that. And that's not unreasonable.
So I guess maybe this is the highest leverage opportunity if you're someone who like both has expertise in ML and in computer security, is trying to figure out how do we make defensive ML algorithms that, can just in a very general sense go out and like find weaknesses and figure out how to fix them.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. And then also find weaknesses and unfixable things. So when we talk about the Internet of Things, everything becoming a computer, one of the worries of this is that there'll be a lot of vulnerable things lying around our environment for years and decades. So if you think about your phone, your computer, it's as secure as it is for two basic reasons. One, the team of engineers at Microsoft and Apple and Google that design them securely. And two, those engineers who are constantly writing and pushing patches down to our devices when vulnerabilities are discovered. Now, that ecosystem doesn't exist in low-cost systems like DVRs and home routers and toys.
Light bulbs, yeah.
Light bulbs,
Toasters.
right? They're toasters. They're designed offshore by third parties. They don't have engineering teams. They often can't be patched. And they're going to be around for decades. So this insecure toaster, 15 years from now, is still making toast and still sending spam or DDoS attacks or whatever because it's horribly insecure. And this is going to be a big problem, right? I mean, our phones and computers, we throw them away after a few years. You think of a car. Actually, a car's a good example. You buy a car today. It offers 2 years old. You can drive for 10 years. You sell it. Somebody else buys it. They drive for 10 years. And they sell it. Probably at that point, it's put on a boat sent somewhere in the Southern Hemisphere where someone else buys it and drives another 10 to 20 years. You find a computer from 1977. You turn it on. Try to make it secure. Try to make it run. We have no idea how to secure 40-year-old consumer software. Both Apple and Microsoft depreciate operating systems after like 5 to 7 years because it's hard to maintain the old stuff. So we're going to need systems that live in our network that kind of monitor all of this old cruft, right? The toy that someone bought in 2020 that was on the internet, now it's 2040, and the thing is still on the internet, even though nobody's played with it in a decade and a half, because it somehow gets its power remotely. We can make this stuff up. And this is going to be a security nightmare. And we're going to need some new technology to solve it. Now, there are people thinking about this. I mean, I didn't make this up. Again, ideas are easy, right? Everyone thinks of everything all the time. But we really need to start thinking about how to deploy these. I mean, do they go in the routers? Do they go in the backbone? Who's liable? What are the regulatory mechanisms by which these things work?
Yeah, the Internet of Things drives me a little bit crazy. I guess somewhat I've skipped over that because it's covered pretty well in your book, and we can link to talks where you've described all the issues there. I mean, are there any particularly high impact things that people can do to it seems like we're just heading towards like a worse and worse situation with so many little pieces of hardware being computerized, and they're all going to end up insecure eventually, right? And like often not getting patched.
Well, I can talk about two other things. I just talked about patching, and so the way patching is going to fail in this world of low cost, embedded, not maintained old systems. So we need to solve that. I think that's a really big problem that we need to figure out. Second thing is authentication. Authentication kind of only ever just barely worked, and we got solutions. We have two-factor, which is great. If you can do it, you often can't. Backup systems we need, and they're often terrible. But authenticating is going to explode in a new way. So that right now, if you authenticate, you're doing either one of two things. So you pick up your phone and I have my phone in my hand and I put my fingerprint on the reader. And then I pushed a button and checked my email. So there's the authentication. It was me authenticating to a device and me authenticating to a remote service. Those are both me authenticating to something else. What we're going to see the rise of is thing-to-thing authentication. So the whole point of 5G is actually not for you to watch Netflix faster. It's so things can talk to things without your intervention. And they're going to have to authenticate. So you think of all of these smart city things so imagine a car, either a driverless car or some kind of driver-assisted car. That car is going to have to authenticate in real time ad hoc to thousands of other cars and road signs and traffic signals and emergency alerts and everything. And we don't know how to do that. We don't know how to authenticate thing to thing at that scale. We do it a little bit. I mean, right now, when I go to my car, my phone automatically authenticates to the car and uses the microphone and speakers. But if you think about it, that's Bluetooth. That works because I was there to set it up. I set it up manually. That's not going to work ad hoc as I'm driving through a city. That's not going to work if I have 100 different IoT devices at my home. I'm not going to pairwise connect 5,000 connections. So we don't have an answer for that. I think that's an area that we need a lot of good research. The third is supply chain security. So this is in the news a lot. I mean, right now it's Huawei and 5G. Should we trust Chinese-made networking equipment? 2 years ago, the problem was Kaspersky. In the U.S., should we trust Russian-made antivirus programs?
Yeah. Should we trust things that are shipped by USPS?
Yeah. So that's the point, right? I mean, the question, can you trust a company that operates in a country you don't trust, is an obvious one, but all computer systems are deeply international. iPhones are American, but they're not made in the U.S. The chips aren't made in the U.S. Their programmers carry 100 different passports. And you have to trust update mechanisms and distribution mechanisms. And you mentioned shipping mechanisms. And you mentioned that because you know of a very famous photograph of NSA employees opening a Cisco router that was destined for the Syrian telephone company. And supply chain is an insurmountably hard problem because we are very international in our industry. And subversion of that supply chain is so easy. I saw a paper you can hack an iPhone through a malicious replacement screen. So you have to trust every aspect of the supply chain, from the chips to the shipping. And we can't. And that's something that is a very difficult problem. Some of it, I think, is an internet-like problem. I mean, if you think about the internet, the original design of the internet was a research solution to the problem, can I build a reliable network out of unreliable parts? I'm asking a similar question. Can I build a secure network system infrastructure out of insecure parts? And that, I think, is a research question on par with the internet.
Nita Farahany on the possibility of hacking neural implants.
I guess thinking about just like other risks and things we should be worried about for these kind of military applications of this technology. One risk that comes to mind is the potential for hacking. I guess to the extent that you'd be kind of uploading a bunch of data from your brain into, well, sending it out to brain, or just like uploading it to physical machines. Does that make brains in general more vulnerable to some kind of hacking by another state or a non-state actor?
Maybe, right? I mean, so, we've talked a little bit about, we're not quite as there yet in writing to the brain as we are in reading the brain, but we are somewhat there in writing to the brain. And I'll answer this a little bit by analogy. So there was a patient who was suffering from really severe depression to the point where she described herself as being terminally ill, like she was at the end of her life. And every different kind of treatment had failed for her. And finally, she agreed with her physicians to have electrodes implanted into her brain. And those electrodes were able to trace the specific neuronal firing patterns in her brain when she was experiencing the most severe symptoms of depression. And then we're able to, after tracing those, every time that, you would have activation of those signals, basically interrupt those signals. So think of it like a pacemaker, but for the brain, where, if like when a signal goes wrong, it would override it and put that new signal in. Mm-hmm. And that meant that she now actually has a typical range of emotions. She has been able to overcome depression. She now lives a life worth living. That's a great story, right? That's a happy story and a happy application of this technology. But that means we're down to the point where you could trace specific, at least with implanted electrodes, neuronal firing patterns, and then interrupt and disrupt those patterns. Can we do the same for other kinds of thoughts, right? Could it be that one day we get to the point where if you're wearing EEG headsets that also have the capacity for neurostimulation, that you could pick up specific patterns of thoughts and disrupt those specific patterns of thoughts if they're hacked, right? If your device is hacked, for example. Maybe, right? I mean, we're now sort of like imagining a science fiction world where this is happening, but
sure.
But that's sort of how I would imagine it would first happen, is that you could have either first very general stimulation like I experienced at the Royal Society meeting, where suddenly I'm experiencing vertigo, right? And that's, somebody could hack your device. Like, I'm wearing this headset for meditation, but, it's hacked and suddenly I'm experiencing vertigo and I'm disabled. That's, devices get hacked. And we can imagine devices getting hacked, and especially ones that have neurostimulation capacity. They could be hacked either in really specific patterns, or they could be hacked in ways that generally could just take a person out.
Okay, well, that is incredibly horrifying.
So do I worry about that? Yes, I worry about it, right? I mean, like, I've been talking with a lot of neurotech companies about, there's not a lot of investment in cybersecurity that's been happening in this space, where when you start to imagine a world in which not only could the information, like what you're thinking and feeling, be hacked, right? So from a privacy concern, but if you're wearing a neurostimulation device, can the device be hacked to create kinds of stimulation that would be harmful to the person? Maybe so. It seems like a really basic and fundamental requirement for these technologies should be to have really good cybersecurity measures that are implemented. I mean, so I do a lot on the ethics of neurotechnology, and I am far more concerned from an ethical perspective about wide-scale consumer-based neurotechnology than I am about implanted neurotechnology. And the reasons that are true are both a very different risk-benefit calculus for the people who are currently part of the population who would receive implanted neurotechnology, but also because it's happening in a really tightly regulated space, as opposed to consumer technology where there's almost no regulations and it's just the Wild West. But in the dystopian world, and with all of those caveats, which I think are really important, I think it's still possible without really good cybersecurity measures that, there's a backdoor into the chips, right? That there's that some bad actor could gain access to implanted electrodes in a person's brain. And if they're both read and write devices, right, not just interrupting a person's mental privacy, but have the capacity of stimulating the brain and changing how a person behaves, there's no way we would really even know that's happening, right? When something is sort of invisibly happening in a person's brain that changes their behavior, how do you have any idea that that's happening because somebody is hacked into their device versus that's, coming from their will or their intentionality? And we have to understand people's relationship to their technology, and we have to be able to somehow observe, something has happened to this person, which would lead us to be able to investigate that something has happened to their device and somebody has gained access to it or interference with it or something like that. We're dealing with such small, tiny patient populations. It's not like the president of the United States has implanted neurotechnology where, some foreign actor is going to say, it's worth it to hack into their device and turn them into the Manchurian candidate. But in the imagined sci-fi world of what could go wrong if this goes to scale and if Elon Musk really does get a brain-computer interface device into every one of our brains, is that we'd have almost no idea that they'd been hacked, that the person had been hacked, and that their behavior is not their own.
Vitalik Buterin on how cybersecurity is the key to defense-dominant futures.
Yeah, I think you've been quite excited about this idea that, people are worried that AI could be very bad for cybersecurity, but it also seems like if you have extremely good, AI that's at the frontier of figuring out how to break things, if it's in the hands of good people and they share the lessons with people so they can patch their systems first, then it potentially could massively improve things. And currently stuff in the crypto world that we're unsure whether it's safe, we could get a lot more confidence in.
Exactly. Yeah. The way that I think about this is if you extrapolate, that space to infinity, then this is actually one of those places where it becomes very defense favoring, right? Because imagine a world where there are open source, infinitely capable bug finders, right? If you have a code with a bug, they'll find it. Then what's going to happen? The good guys have it and the bad guys have it. Well, so what's the result? Basically, every single software developer is going to put the magic bug finder into their GitHub continuous integration pipeline. And so it'll just by the time your code even hits the public internet, it'll just automatically have all of the bugs, detected and possibly fixed by the AI, right? So the end game actually is bug-free code, very plausibly, right? That's obviously a future that feels very far away right now. But as we know with AI, going from no capability to superhuman capability can happen within half a decade. So that's potentially one of those things that's very exciting. It definitely is something that in Ethereum we care about a lot.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I've been mulling over, which is very often the question comes with some branch of technology. In this case, AI, but we could think about lots of other things. You say, is it offense favoring or defense favoring? And it can be quite hard to predict ahead of time. I guess with some things, maybe horse archery. Historically, maybe you could have guessed ahead of time that was going to be offense favoring and going to be very destabilizing to the steppes of Asia. But with AI, it's kind of a difficult thing to answer. But one idea that I had was when it comes to machine versus machine interactions, like with cybersecurity, seems like it might well be defense favoring or at least neutral, because any weakness that you can identify, you can equally patch it almost immediately, because the machines that are finding the problems are they're the same being, they're the same structure as the thing that is being attacked. And the thing that's being attacked, you can change almost arbitrarily in order to fix the weakness. When it comes to machine versus human interactions, though, the dynamic is quite different in that we're kind of stuck with humans as we are. We're this like legacy piece of technology that we've inherited from evolution. And whenever you find if a machine finds a bug in humans that it can exploit in order to kill us or affect us, we can't just go in and change the code. Can't just go and change our genetics and fix everyone in order to patch it. We're stuck doing this really laborious indirect thing, like using mRNA vaccines to try to get our immune system that's already there to hopefully fight off something. But you could potentially find ways that would not work. Diseases that the immune system wouldn't be able to respond to. I guess like HIV has to some extent had that. What do you think of this idea? The machine versus machine, maybe neutral, defense favoring, but machine versus humans, because we just can't change humans arbitrarily and we don't even understand how they work, is potentially offense favoring.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think a big part of the answer to this is something I wrote about in the post, which is we need to get to a world where humans have machines protecting us as part of the interface that we use to access the world, right? And this is actually something that's really starting to happen more and more in crypto. Basically, wallets started off as being this like very dumb technology, right? That's just there to manage your private key and follow a standardized API. You want to sign a thing, you sign it. But if you look at modern crypto wallets, there's a lot of sophisticated stuff that's going on, and that like so far it's not using LLMs or any of the super fancy stuff, but it's like still pretty sophisticated stuff to try to actually identify what things you might be doing that are potentially dangerous or that might potentially go against your intent and like really do a serious job of warning you, right? So like in MetaMask, like it has a list of known scam websites, and like if you try to go and access one of them, like it blocks it and it shows like a big red scam warning, right? In Rabby, which is an Ethereum wallet developed by this lovely team in Singapore that I've been using recently. They really go the extra mile. It's like if you're sending money to an address you haven't interacted with, they show a warning for that. If you're interacting with an application that like most other people have not interacted with, it shows a warning for that. It also shows you the results of simulating transactions, so you get to see like what the expected consequences of a transaction are. Like it just shows you like a bunch of different things, and like tries to put in speed bumps before doing any actually dangerous stuff. And there definitely were some like recent scam attempts that actually Rabby successfully kind of managed to catch and prevent people from falling for, right? Yeah. So like the next frontier of that, I think, is definitely to have AI assisted kind of bots. AI-assisted software being part of people's windows to the internet and protecting them against all of these adversarial actors. I think one of the challenges there is that we need to have a category of actor that is incentivized to actually do that for people, right? Because the application's not going to do that for you. The application's interest is not to protect you. The application's interest is to find ways to exploit you, right? If there can be like a category of actor where their entire business model actually is dependent on long-term satisfaction from users, then they could actually be sort of the equivalent of a defense lawyer and actually fight for you and actually be willing to be adversarial against the stuff that you access, right?
I guess that makes sense in the information space, where you can imagine the computer, you interact with your AI assistant that then does all of the information filtering and interaction with the rest of the world. I guess the thing I was more worried about was bioweapons or biodefense, where one of the big concerns people have about AI is, couldn't it be used to help design extremely dangerous pathogens?
Yes.
And there it seems harder to patch human beings in order to defend them against that. Although the weakness of that argument is, we were just saying we're on the cusp of coming up with very generic technologies like air purification that we could install everywhere that seem like they would do a lot to defend us against the diseases that we're familiar with. So maybe there are some generic things that even AI could possibly help, technologies that AI could help advance, that still would be defense dominant, because maybe, I don't know what the underlying reason would be, but maybe, yeah.
This is one of those things where I think both offense and defense have these big step functions, right? Where it's one question is, what is the level of capability of printing a super plague, right? Are you just making minor modifications and fine tuning COVID the same way the Hugging Face people are fine tuning Llama, or are you actually really doing serious shit that goes way beyond that? And like if, for example, you're just fine-tuning COVID, then like wastewater detection becomes much easier because like the wastewater detectors are already tuned to, like COVID as a sequence, right?
Right.
But if you have to defend against like arbitrary dangerous plagues, it's like actually a significantly harder problem.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, for vaccines, it's similar. And then for like the level of dangerousness, it's similar. And then the step function is like, yeah, if you actually can make all of this like air purification infrastructure much more powerful, then like our zeros go way down, and like you actually get possibly some kind of upper limit there. But then the other step function on the offense side is like, what if you go beyond biological diseases and like you figure out more crazy nanotechnology, and how do you start defending against that? I think. Trying to get like push defensive technologies forward is like something that's really important, and it can even have positive knock-on effects. So one example of this is like if we fix cybersecurity, then like we kneecap the entire class of like super intelligence doom scenarios that involve the AI hacking things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of people are working on that, and I think it's
right.
among the most important things that anyone is doing at the moment.
Right. Exactly.
Nova DasSarma, an exciting progress in information security.
Do you have any view on whether kind of ML itself is making security better or worse?
Hard question. I think that probably it's going to make things better. And the reason I believe this is I think that a lot of the work that's being done at places like Apple on security is also driven by ML. And I know I've specifically called out Apple a couple of times here. There are other things that, like, for example, like the Google security blog is fantastic to read. But yeah, I think that security researchers getting access to more sophisticated models is going to be quite positive. And I also think that there's a possibility that we can use ML models to drive formal verification forward and to drive adoption of programming practices that are more defensive, that are harder to break into with ML. So I think that it is definitely a spy versus spy sort of scenario where the technology is very much dual use, and it's certainly going to have some growing pains as these things become more capable. But I'm hopeful that that's going to result in a more secure, while still being usable future.
Yeah, yeah. To what extent would computer security benefit from just more money being spent on it, basically, by the relevant actors? I ask this because I think I remember reading about someone who got paid a bug bounty, basically, for finding this horrific flaw. I can't remember if it was in like Mac OS or in the iPhone or something like that. But plausibly, they could have sold this for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars because of like the power, basically, of this exploit. And I think they got $1 million or something from Apple for going through their bug bounty program.
It's pretty good. I see thousands of dollars often, or hundreds.
Right, yeah. So I think this was one of the largest, but it was nevertheless like much less than you might imagine they might be able to sell it to criminals for or to state actors for.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose, of course, there's like most people would rather sell the thing to Apple, I imagine, all else equal, and they'd rather probably not be on the run from the feds. But would it maybe just help to like throw more money basically at getting people who are kind of on the fence between being good actors and bad actors to be good actors?
That's a great question. And honestly, I'm not sure. But my guess is yes, it definitely seems like something where we've seen bug bounties show up more often. We've seen security researchers get paid better. And I think we've seen an increase in the resulting security and a decrease in the prevalence of people trying to passively break into systems for money instead of getting to work on a team of people who are all trying to break into things for money and not going to jail.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I started out this conversation feeling a little bit some degree of despair because it sounded like this was borderline futile trying to prevent this information from getting out. But it seems like there are people who are making some serious effort, and hopefully, maybe if we have years or decades to try to improve what the state of the art is, maybe we're not completely screwed. That any ML model is going to be like stolen pretty quick smart.
Yeah, I think there's some pretty exciting progress. I think that right now, if we were to produce AGI in our kitchen, it would be stolen. But I think that if you don't have that case and the timelines are longer, then you have time to do things like build your own formally verified systems that are very robust to these sorts of attacks.
Yeah, can you explain what formal verification is?
Formal verification is like a logical technique for talking about the execution of a piece of software, or really an algorithm. And you would use something like this to describe the behavior that you want in a system, and then basically create a very, very long, complicated proof that proves that there are no vulnerabilities or unexpected behaviors or undefined behaviors in the system. If you look at something like, for example, the C language, which is a systems language that is used for producing things like the Linux kernel and other like really important pieces of software, there are certain kinds of operations that you can do that are just simply not defined in the specification for it. If you look at almost any piece of software, there are ways you can give it sufficiently weird, sufficiently well-crafted inputs that will cause it to crash, that will cause it to overwrite pieces of memory that you didn't expect it to. And formal verification is a technique for preventing those things going into software in the first place. Of course, it's quite difficult. You don't see very many large pieces of software produced this way, but we've seen some pretty interesting examples of things like microkernels that come out of mostly academic labs that are interested in this sort of thing, where you've got a kernel that has some very limited functionality, but is completely proven.
Interesting. Okay, so this is something we kind of know how to do, but it's like quite challenging. And I guess the more complicated the program you're making, the harder it is to formally prove that there's no circumstance under which it might do X. There's no input that can produce X as an output.
Yes. If you think about the complications inside of a program, you have a lot of cases where you're multiplying and putting exponents on the complication of the kinds of inputs that might come into the system. And a good technique for making your program able to be formally verified is splitting up the input in ways where you can formally verify parts and then talk about things at that level of abstraction. So you can say that these parts interact in a particular way.
Okay. Is this a kind of new technology? I remember hearing about people bring up formal verification years ago, and I think they were talking about it with the sense that this was something that didn't really work at the time, but might get better in future. Is it an area of research where we're improving?
It definitely seems like we're improving. Yeah, I think that programming language design in general has come a really long way since the dawn of computing. So I definitely think that there's progress there, and it's a pretty exciting field to be working in. That being said, I think we will have to have some really significant advances in programming language theory to have formal verification become, a very accepted part of the tool belt.
Yeah. I guess I was saying I was optimistic because it sounded like there were a bunch of, or at least like some people were succeeding partially when it came to information security. But I guess we should only kind of be optimistic if we think that on balance, like information security or computer security is improving over time rather than staying static or getting worse. Would you say we're getting better, or at least like maybe building up the capability to in future become better at securing information?
Yes, I think I can confidently say that things have gotten better over time. Things have gotten much more complicated. And obviously, like the surface has increased. But as that surface has increased, you've also gotten the incentives in play for people to secure things. Moving e-commerce online, or moving commerce to e-commerce, having online systems that are handling large amounts of money has been a fantastic motivator in getting people to think about how they can write software in a way that doesn't get you broken into. When I was in middle school, we had some software on the Macs in the computer lab. That didn't let me run, I think, NetHack at the time, which is like a text adventure game.
Yeah.
And I was pretty upset about it. And so at the time, it was like extremely trivial for me at like 12 or whatever to, boot this thing into a recovery mode where it didn't check for password, and then you could change the password in the password file because it wasn't very well encrypted and things like that. And that just wouldn't happen today, right? If you look at something like the MacBook, the M1 chip, a lot of the passwords are secured in a hardware chip that is specifically designed to resist this sort of thing, as opposed to on a file on disk. Now, that's not true of everything. We certainly see, for example, in the Okta hack recently, there was a Excel file that contained the password for a LastPass account, which is certainly something you don't want to see as somebody on the security side of things. So obviously, the last system to secure is humanity. So you can have as secure a system as you want. If you put a sticky note on the outside of your laptop that has your password that is going to be visible to somebody who is on a Zoom meeting with you, then perhaps your security is not so good after all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose you could have two-factor authentication. Use the keys that you have to physically have in order to secure something, so the password isn't so central. Oh,
for sure. Yeah, I think multi-factor authentication is very, very exciting, actually. Something where you can both prove who somebody is and what somebody has is pretty important. So we've seen some advances in this. For example, now there are more places that might require two-factor authentication, that might require two-factor authentication that isn't through SMS, and might even support something like FIDO2, which is a protocol where not only is the key that you're producing out of this hardware device specific to that device and that user, but it's also specific to the site that you're authenticating with as well.
Yeah. I guess Anthropic is a reasonably new organization. It's kind of a year or two old. Is there anything important that you did in kind of setting up the way the systems work that secure it to some degree?
Sure. I mean, I think that talking about having corporate devices is pretty important.
Yeah.
I think another thing to think about is we used to talk about trusted networks and having things like a corporate network. And I think that Google's done some pretty good work with things like BeyondCorp, where you don't really think about a VPN or something like that for security. You instead think about identity-based authentication. So there's no such thing as a trusted network where you get on it, you no longer have to authenticate to grab files off of a shared SharePoint drive or something like that. You're always authenticating at every step. The other thing that we do that I suggest to every organization is to think about single sign-on, to make sure that you don't have your users managing passwords for many services, juggling passwords around where it can get very tedious for them to use a different password for every service. So using things like a password manager and single sign-on can help mitigate some of those flaws.
Yeah. Anthropic has appeared during the COVID era, which I imagine means that you've probably been working remotely, at least in part. Do you think as security becomes like an even bigger concern, as hopefully your models become more capable of doing important things, is there a chance that you'll basically have to stop being remote or have some kind of physical restriction on access to models or data in order to like ensure that they are sufficiently secure?
I would not be surprised if that's something that happens in future. That being said, I think that we've actually had some advantages in terms of starting out with this remote policy. You can't have a trusted network that everybody's on if everybody's on their own network. So it's been important in sort of driving forward the identity-based authentication policies there. So I agree that I think physical security is going to be quite important in future. And there are sorts of mitigations that you can't really express remotely. But yeah, I think that's in our future timeline.
Nathan Labenz on how even internal teams at AI companies might not know what they're building.
And this is one thing, too, that is really interesting about the Anthropic approach. And I don't know a lot about this, but my sense is that the knowledge sharing at OpenAI is pretty high. You know, they're very tight about sharing stuff outside the company. But I think inside the company, people broadly have a pretty good idea of what's going on. At Anthropic, I have the sense that they have a highly collaborative culture. People speak very well about, working there and all that. But they do have a policy of certain very sensitive things being need to know only. And this kind of realization that we're getting to the point where the fog may be lifting and, it's possible now to start to squint and kind of see specific forms of AGI has me a little bit questioning that need to know policy within one of the leading companies, because on the one hand, it's like an anti-proliferation measure. I think that's how they've conceived of it, right? They don't want their stuff to leak. And so, and they know that it's inevitable that they're going to have an agent of the Chinese government work for them at some point, so they're trying to.
At some point?
Yeah, maybe already. But if not already, then certainly at some point.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to harden their own defenses so that even if they have, a spy internally, then that would still not be enough, for certain things to end up making their way to, the Chinese intelligence service or whatever. And obviously that's a very, worthwhile consideration, both for just straightforward commercial reasons for them, as well as, broader security reasons. But then at the same time, you do have the problem that if only a few people know kind of the most critical details of certain training techniques or whatever, then not very many people, even internally at the company that's building it, maybe have enough of a picture to really do the questioning of what is it that we are exactly, going to be building, and is it what we want? And I think that question is definitely one that we really do want to continue to ask. I don't know enough about what's been implemented at Anthropic to say like this is definitely a problem or not. But it's just been a new thought that I've had recently that, if the team is the check that is really going to matter, if we can't really rely on these like protocols to hold up under intense global pressure, but the team can walk, then there could be some weirdness if you like haven't even shared, the information with most of the team internally. So I do hope that, that's another, they've got a lot of considerations to try to balance there. And I hope they at least factor that one in.
Allan Dafoe on backdooring your own AI to prevent someone else from stealing it.
This is slightly out of place. What I mentioned, this crazy idea that you could use the possibility of having backdoored a model to make it extremely undesirable to steal a model from someone else and apply it. You can imagine, the US might say, well, maybe we've backdoored the models that we're using in our national security infrastructure so that if they detect that they're being operated by a different country, then they're going to completely flip out and behave incredibly differently. And there'll be almost no way to detect that. So that could be, I think it's a bad situation in general, but this could be one way that you could make it more difficult to hack and take advantage or just like steal at the last minute the model of a different group.
Yeah. So arguably this very notion of backdooring one's own models as an anti-theft device, just the very idea could deter model theft. It makes a model a lot less useful once you've stolen it if you think it might have this call home feature or behave contrary to the thief's intentions feature. Another interesting property of this backdoor dynamic is it actually provides an incentive for a would-be thief to invest in alignment technology because you want to, if you're going to steal a model, you want to make sure you can detect if it has this backdoor in it. And then for the anti-theft purposes, if you want to build an anti-theft backdoor, you again want to invest in alignment technology so you can make sure your anti-theft backdoor will survive the current state of the art in alignment.
Yeah, a virtuous cycle.
So maybe this is a good direction for the world to go because it, as a byproduct, incentivizes alignment research. I think there could be undesirable effects if it leads models to have this kind of highly sensitive architectures to subtle aspects of the model. Or maybe it even makes models more prone to very subtle forms of deception. So more research needed for investing.
Sounds a little bit like dancing on a knife edge.
Tom Davidson on just how dangerous secret loyalties in AI models could become.
It seems to me that it may well be technically feasible to create AI systems that appear when you interact with them to kind of have the broad interests of society in mind, to respect the rule of law, but actually secretly are loyal to one person. So this is what I call the problem of secret loyalties. And so if there was someone who was powerful in an AI project and they did want to ultimately seize power, it seems like one thing that they could try to do is actually make it so that all superhuman AI that is ever created is actually secretly loyal to them. And then as it's deployed throughout the economy, as it's deployed in the government, as it's deployed in the military, as it's deployed, talking with people every day, advising them on their work, advising them on what they should do, it's, constantly looking for opportunities to kind of secretly represent the interests of that one person and seize power. And so between them, this kind of possibility of secret loyalties and the possibility of using this vast amount of intellectual labor for the purposes of seizing power, it does seem to me like a scarily technologically feasible that you could have a tiny group or just one person successfully seizing power.
And just to clarify why it is that you could end up with all of these AIs, these many different AI models through society, all being loyal to one person, is that it's kind of the poison begins at the very beginning. If you have, because it's the AIs that are doing the AI research and figuring out how to train these other models, if the first one that is responsible for that kind of AI research is loyal to one individual, and that individual instructs them to make sure that all subsequent models also maintain this secret loyalty, then it kind of just continues on indefinitely from there.
Exactly. So initially, probably it's just the kind of AI research replacements AIs that are secretly loyal, just, the AIs that are operating within the within the lab. But then, later they'll be making other AIs. Maybe they'll be making AIs to control military equipment. Maybe they'll be making kind of specialized AI for controlling robots. And they could kind of, as you say, place those secret loyalties in all those other AI systems, or place backdoors in those other AI systems, so that ultimately, that one person is able to kind of maintain effective control over this kind of broad infrastructure of AIs and robots.
This issue of secret loyalties might sound a little bit sci-fi to people, or a little bit strange.
Yep.
But I guess we should say it's a very live problem. But it kind of is the case that with current models, with our current level of ability to look inside and understand what they're doing, it's possible to give them secret agendas that they don't reveal except at the time when that agenda is kind of called on. And even if you inspect the model, you can't figure out that there is such a secret loyalty there. Is there more to it?
I'd say today, the systems aren't clever enough for this to be very sophisticated. So it is true, there's this kind of sleeper agents paper from Anthropic where they, one example is they have an AI system that writes secure code when it can see it's 2023, but then it inserts vulnerabilities when it's 2024. And, that's a loose analog to an AI system that mostly seems to act in the interest of everyone, but when it sees there's a chance, kind of will advance one person's interests because of the secret loyalty. But the truth is that they're not able to very sophisticatedly kind of execute on that kind of strategy. And so if, you were playing around with the system and you could, give it a million different inputs and see how it reacts, you would probably be able to detect, okay, no, this is an AI system that's, got some kind of secret hidden agenda. So it's not, I would say, a risk today that there could actually be secret loyalties we're not aware of. But, we're looking forward to much more powerful systems. There's kind of an example with human spies who, are able to, live in a different country, work in a different organization, and, consistently fool all of their colleagues about their true intentions while, taking rare opportunities to defect. And so, that's kind of, an example of the kind of thing we could see in the future. And, I expect that AI systems will be much more intelligent than humans, eventually. And so, that's kind of, a minimum threshold for how sophisticated the kind of strategies could be that these kind of secretly loyal AIs could execute.
Yeah. My understanding from the sleeper agents paper was that the key issue is that if you don't know what the trigger is for the loyalty to be activated, then it's very hard to observe it in any of your evaluations or testing of the model. So if you know what the trigger is and you can kind of trick it into being activated, then you can tell that it's there. But and I guess people are trying to work on other methods, I suppose, that would allow you to scrutinize the models and detect other loyalties or other abnormal behavior that's been implanted in it. In response to particular triggers that you might not know, but we're kind of not there yet.
That's right. There's a bit of a cat and mouse game. So there are methods for detecting at least simple triggers where you can kind of, look for what inputs would trigger certain problematic behaviors. And so there's a bit of a cat and mouse game. But yeah, I think I agree broadly. There's not like any kind of super robust ways of detecting all the different triggers that could exist. Well, one thing maybe worth mentioning here is an analogy with misalignment, where people worry about schemas, that is AIs that are kind of pretending to be aligned with us, but are secretly pursuing their own agendas. And, one thing that's worth mentioning is that I think that these secret loyalties are strictly more plausible, technically speaking, than scheming AIs. Because with scheming AIs, the worry is that you just kind of train it, and then without you're intending to do so, the AI just ends up with this kind of secret agenda that it manages to conceal from you. Here, we're actually managing that there's, potentially a significant technological effort to install that behavior and make it so that no one can detect it when they do testing. So I would expect that, if there's any risk of scheming being possible, then there would be, a very large risk that it would be possible to do very sophisticated secret loyalties.
Are there any interventions that we can use to focus on this secret loyalties problem in particular?
Yeah, there's two that I have in mind. So the first is inspections of the model to make sure that there aren't secret loyalties. So I think this is kind of, a very kind of early stage kind of technical research problem. But, essentially, in principle, there's various types of kind of technical checks you could do to see, is there a chance that secret loyalties are present in this trained model? So, the most basic is probably kind of behavioral testing of the model after it's been trained. So kind of give it loads of different inputs and see, can you, under any scenario, kind of trick it into revealing its secret loyalty. Another one would be looking at the kind of the data and the algorithms used to train it and kind of looking for, are there patterns of data there that could encode some kind of secret loyalty? As we alluded to earlier, this is tricky because there's loads of different kind of code words or triggers that you could use to kind of elicit the undesirable behavior. So that is potentially challenging. But on the other hand, if you have what's called white box access to the model, you can kind of search for inputs that would produce particular types of outputs. Then or you can do interpretability in terms of the model weights, and there might be kind of more hope there for actually detecting secret loyalties. And maybe the most promising is actually kind of monitoring and then inspecting the process by which the algorithms and data inputs were kind of gathered together in the first place. So, if there's a kind of a very structured step-by-step process by which the training data is, procedurally generated by code, and you can inspect that code and you can inspect kind of how that code was written step by step, then you might just see, look, each of these steps is so reasonable and so standard that there's no point at which someone has been able to introduce a particular kind of effort to subvert the training process. There's no point at which someone has been able to throw in extra data that would kind of systematically produce a sophisticated secret loyalty. And so that could potentially give us some level of assurance.
Yeah. In my own mind, should I be imagining that the secret loyalty is introducing this kind of ambient bias in the advice and the actions of all of these AIs across society as they're embedded into decision-making and businesses and the military and so on? Or rather that they all act completely normal for some period of time until they kind of flip completely because they're going to strike and enable a coup by the group to which they're secretly loyal? Seems like they're kind of quite different pictures of what this might look like.
Yeah, I think it could be either, and probably the most kind of worrying version is where the model is just secretly aware on some level that it's trying to advance the interests of one person, and then picks whatever strategy it kind of judges will be best. So maybe in some scenarios, like, the autocratization scenario, it's kind of speaking to lots of politicians and advising them, and it does kind of bias its advice on kind of a daily basis in order to kind of promote one person's interests. But then, when it's kind of being deployed in the military, it kind of the kind of the strategic situation is very different. And so maybe in that context, it more makes sense, as you say, to completely behave until the one moment where you kind of start executing a coup. And if we're talking about, truly superhuman intelligent AI systems, then there could be a risk that they can kind of do both of these.
Yeah, they can figure out which one is best depending on the circumstance. So it seems like there's broadly two different approaches that one might take to heading this off early on. I guess one is advancing the state of interpretability, or our ability to scrutinize models after the fact and then see, do they have any secret loyalty? Trying to detect that better than we currently can. Yeah. The other is, I think, as more access control, or looking at the training data that produced a given model. And that's even if you couldn't tell after the fact whether a model does have a secret loyalty, if you could literally look at all of the reinforcement, all of the materials that were fed into it to begin with. Presumably, in order to create a secret loyalty, you would have to actually reinforce it at some point for going along with that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'd say I'd add in that we could do kind of an extra kind of level of check here, where we could have a team within the organization tasked with actually trying to produce a secret loyalty and trying to kind of sneak it past the inspection process. And so that team could use the kind of most sophisticated techniques possible to try and insert a secret loyalty, and then if they're able to kind of sneak it past the inspector, then that would give us reason for alarm. But if consistently and robustly the inspection process is able to detect this, then actually that might give us some real confidence. I should back up and say, everything we've been discussing is really falling for me within this kind of inspecting the model behavior, inspecting the inputs to the model behavior. There's a whole nother class of interventions that are needed for secret loyalties on the kind of internal infosecurity side.
Okay.
So, even if you've got the most amazing inspection process and, you absolutely guarantee that the model you trained is, has no secret loyalties, there's then this more basic worry that someone just kind of hacks the computer system and then is able to kind of sub out your kind of perfectly kind of safe system and then sub in another system that they kind of train secretly off to the side, which does, have a secret loyalty. And so, to kind of robustly prevent secret loyalties, we need to be kind of reliably winning on two fronts. Firstly, the kind of technical assessment of the AI system that was trained, and then secondly, on the kind of internal info security, kind of making sure that no insider threat is able to compromise the computer system in a way that allows them to kind of alter the model that's being served.
I think, well, there's three fronts, maybe more of them. So you've got to make sure that the model that's being deployed hasn't had a secret loyalty put into it. You've got to ensure that nobody can get access to the purely helpful model, that where all you have to do is just give it the instruction and it's going to go out and do the thing. You also have to make sure, that there's no flipping, there's no switching of the model. I guess I don't know how difficult or easy that is, but someone could introduce a secret loyalty into a different model and then make that the one that's deployed, and then make it difficult to pick that up.
That's right. I mean, if you really, kind of do very good inspection of the trained model and very good internal info security, then even if someone gets access to a helpful only model, you might say that, your other two defenses should catch that, because at some point that helpful only model will have to, either compromise the internal info security to do this swapping in, swapping out, or it will have to, insert a secret loyalty into another model which is being trained, which then maybe you could kind of spot when that happens. So in principle, I mean, you definitely do want to lock down the helpful only model as well, because that would just kind of be a big risk factor. But in principle, if you get the inspection and the info security right, then that should defend.
Do you have any sense of how close the companies are to having any of these things implemented?
My impression is that things are at a very early stage in terms of having a kind of robust technical process for inspecting for secret loyalties. We're only just recently seeing the sleeper agents paper from Anthropic, and it'd be a very natural extension of that to then look into techniques for detecting sleeper agents, and beginning this kind of cat and mouse game about whether they can then find new techniques to hide more kind of subtle sleeper agents. I think on the info security side, my understanding is that these organizations are not where they want to be in terms of preventing their model weights being exfiltrated. And my guess is that the extent they are really focused on info security, they're mostly focused on stopping that from happening. They may be a lot less focused, or not at all focused, on the kind of internal info security that would allow this kind of sabotage of the training process, or the kind of swapping in, swapping out of the model at the end. So there might be very little work on that happening, or none.
Yeah, I think all of these companies, I guess, ultimately started as technology companies, and probably their information security is very good by the standards of a tech startup, which I guess is appropriate given what they're doing. But I think it's not normal for a tech company to think it's absolutely essential that we have all of these internal controls on what our own staff, what our own researchers, what our own CEO can plausibly do. That's quite an unusual circumstance. That maybe you might see that more in banking or in the military, but not so much normally in a tech company. So it's quite a shift of frame, and probably requires quite a lot of stuff that is not standard in their industry.
That's right. Although it's interesting because these companies are increasingly being quite explicit about the fact that they expect to develop superhuman capabilities, in the next few years. So, there really should increasingly be a realization that the info security needs to improve.
When I spoke with Carl Shulman about issues in this general direction, he pointed out that inasmuch as any country wants to deploy AI in the military in order to remain competitive, it's extremely important from their point of view that they be able to detect secret loyalties, and that they be able to detect any abnormal behavior that might be possible to trigger, because that could just be completely catastrophic from their point of view, especially if you could even imagine that they might have been inserted by a foreign military that was trying to, introduce some code word that they could use to deactivate the other side's military. That's a scenario that's so unacceptable that you wouldn't accept even a low probability of it. And so you really need to be able to inspect the training data, make sure that kind of thing is not the case. Is it possible to get big government grants, big military grants? This seems like the sort of agenda that DARPA might be able to fund. I guess, I don't know, IARPA perhaps, because it is just so important to the sorts of applications that governments might want to make of AI.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think there should and will be very wide interest in this problem. I think there's an existing research field into backdooring AI systems, and lots of papers written about different techniques for kind of introducing backdoors, detecting them, and so that's a research field which I imagine could absorb more funding and would be relevant to this. And then recently, as I said, Anthropic had the sleeper agent problem. And so, that's getting into more sophisticated types of backdoors where the AI is kind of purposefully kind of being deceptive the whole time and choosing when it should or should not reveal its hand. And it does seem like, there's room for a lot of research to be done into different techniques here, different ways of detecting it. And so it does seem like something that could potentially be scaled up a lot.
Carl Shulman on whether we should be worried about backdoors as governments adopt AI technology.
So we can imagine a world in which different actors are training these extremely useful models that help them to understand the world better and make better decisions. We could imagine that the U.S. State Department, for example, has a very good model that helps it figure out how it can coordinate better with other countries on AI regulation, among other things. I think it would be even nicer if both the U.S. State Department and the Chinese government agreed that the same model was trustworthy and very insightful, and that both of them would believe the things that it said, especially regarding their interactions and their agreements. But how could two different parties that are somewhat adversarial towards one another both come to trust that at least that the same model is reasonably trustworthy for both of them and isn't going to screw over one party because it's kind of been backdoored by the people who made it? How can you get agreement and trust between adversaries about which models you can believe?
Yeah. So first of all, right now this is a difficult problem. And you can see that with respect to large software products. So if Windows has backdoors, say to enable the CIA to root machines running it, Russia or China cannot just purchase off-the-shelf software and have their cybersecurity agencies go through it and find every single zero-day exploit and bug. It's just quite beyond their capabilities. Now they can look, and if they find even one, then say, now we're no longer doing trust commercial software that is coming from country X. They can do that, but they can't reliably find every single exploit that exists within a large piece of software. And there's some evidence that may be true with these AIs. So for one thing, there will be software programs running the neural network and providing the scaffolding for AI agents or networks of AI agents and their tools, which can have backdoors in the ordinary way. There are issues with adversarial examples, data poisoning, and passwords. So a model can be trained to behave normally, classify images accurately, or produce text normally under most circumstances. But then in response to some special stimulus that would never be produced spontaneously, it will then behave in some quite different way, such as turning against a user who had purchased a copy of it or had been given some access. And so that's a problem. And developing technical methods that either are able to locate that kind of data poisoning or conditional disposition, or are able to somehow moot it. For example, by making it so that if there are any of these habits or dispositions, they will wind up unable to actually control the behavior of the AI. You give it some additional training that restricts how it would react to such impulses. Maybe you have some majority voting system. You could imagine any number of techniques. But right now, I think technically, you have a very difficult time being sure that an AI provided by some other company or some other country genuinely had the loyalties that were being claimed, and especially that it wouldn't, in response to some special code or stimulus, suddenly switch its behavior or switch its loyalties. So that is an area where I would very much encourage technical research. Governments that want to have the ability to manage that sort of thing, which they have very strong reasons to do, should want to invest in it. Because if government contractors are producing AIs that are going to be a foundation, not just of the public epistemology and political things, but also of industry, security, and military applications, the US military should be pretty wary of a situation where, for all they know, one of their contractors supplying AI systems can give a certain code word and the U.S. military no longer works for the U.S. military. It works for Google or Microsoft or whatnot. That's just a situation that just
not very appealing.
Not very appealing. It's not one that would arise for a Boeing. Even if there were sort of sabotage or backdoor placed in some systems, the potential rewards or uses of that would be less. But if you're deploying these powerful AI systems at scale, they're having an enormous amount of influence and power in society, eventually to the point where ultimately the instruments of state hinge on their loyalties. You really don't want to have this kind of backdoor or password, because it could actually overthrow the government, potentially. So this is a capability that governments should very, very much want, almost regardless. And this is a particular application where they should really want it. But it's also would be important for being sure that AI systems deployed at scale by a big government, will not betray that government, I say, on behalf of the companies that produce them, will not betray the constitutional or legal order of that state on behalf of, say, the executive officials who are nominally in charge of those. You don't want to have AI enabling a coup that overthrows democracy on behalf of a president against a Congress, or if you have AI that is developed under international auspices. So it's supposed to reflect some agreement between multiple states that are all contributing to the endeavor or have joined in a treaty arrangement. You want to be sure that AIs will respect the terms of behavior that were specified by the multinational agreement and not betray the larger project on behalf of any member state or participating organization. So this is a technology that we really should want systematically, just because empowering AIs this much, we want to be able to know their loyalties and not have it be dependent on no one having inserted an effective backdoor anywhere along a chain of production.
Yeah. I guess if both you and the other party were both able to inspect all of the data that went into training a model and all of the reinforcement that went into generating its weights and its behaviors, it seems like that would put you in a better position for both sides to be able to trust it, because they could inspect all of that data and see if there's anything sketchy in it, and then they could potentially train the model themselves from scratch using that data and confirm that yes, if you use this data, then you get these weights out of it. It's a bit like how multiple parties could look at the source code of a program and then they could compile it and confirm that they get the same thing out of it at the other end. So I suppose the trickier situation is one in which the two parties are not willing to hand over the data completely and allow the other party to train the model from scratch using that data to confirm that it matches. But in fact, that would be the situation in many of the most important cases that we're concerned about.
I think you're being a bit too optimistic about that now. So people have inserted vulnerabilities intentionally into open source projects. And so exchanging the source code is not enough on its own. And even a history of every single commit and every single team meeting of programmers producing the thing isn't necessarily enough. But it certainly helps. So the more data you have explaining how a final product came to be, the more places there are for there to be some slip up, something that reveals shenanigans with the process. And that actually does point to a way in which even an untrusted model, where you're not convinced of its loyalties or whether it has a backdoor password, can provide significant epistemic help in these kinds of adversarial situations. And the idea here is it can be easier to trace out that some chain of logic or some argument or demonstration is correct than it is to find it yourself. And so say you have one nation state whose AI models are somewhat behind in others. It may be that the more advanced AI models can produce arguments and evidence in response to questions and cross-examination by the weaker AI models, such that they have to reveal the truth despite their greater abilities. So earlier we talked about adversarial testing and how you could see, can you develop a set of rules where it's easy to assess whether those rules are being followed? And while complying with those rules, even a stronger model that is incentivized to lie is unable to get a lie past a weaker judge, like a weaker AI model or a human. And so it may be that following rules analogous to pre-registering your hypotheses, having your experiments all be under video cameras, following rules of consistency, passing cross-examination of various kinds, that the weaker parties' models are able to do much more with access to an untrusted, even more capable model than they can do on their own. And that might not give you the full benefit that you would realize if both sides had models they fully trust with no suspicion of backdoors. But it could help to bridge some of that gap. And it might bridge the gap on some critical questions.
Nova DasSarma on politically motivated cyber attacks.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, folks were really worried that the GPT-2 language model and then the GPT-3 language model might, if people had broader access to them, or they could reproduce that kind of result, that those models could then be used for crime or just some kind of negative purpose that we haven't yet thought of. I suppose, actually, yeah, I remember people thought that perhaps that'd be used to simulate actors on social media and just create so much noise on social media and make it impossible to tell who was a real person and who was not. I guess, for that matter, a lot of people, including me, kind of predicted that during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we'd see a lot of cyber attacks. I guess competition between the US and Russia, as well as, I suppose, Russia using cyber attacks in order to deactivate infrastructure or personnel within Ukraine. But as far as I know, we kind of haven't seen very much of that. Is this a little reassuring that, although in any specific case, there's like a lot of potential for information to leak, information to be misused, in practice, just lots of things that could happen don't happen?
Well, I hate to disagree here.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Unfortunately, we actually have seen quite a few things that look like this. So not on the AI side, but during the Russian invasion of Ukraine ongoing, one of the most successful Russian efforts was to disrupt communications out of Kiev. And that was definitely something that involved a cyber attack on Ukraine. We've also seen Ukraine, punch back, have a call to action for their homegrown hackers to take on the Russian state there. And we've seen that sort of thing. In the software ecosystem, we've seen some serious disruptions from individual actors doing things like there's an NPM package, so NPM being the JavaScript package repository, where somebody pushed a malicious code update that checked whether the code was running on a Russian or a Belarusian computer. And if it was, then it deleted everything on the hard drive. And this was a project that was included by many, many other projects. And it turns out that was quite damaging. There's a thread which I have no way of verifying on their GitHub from somebody claiming to be an NGO operating for whistleblowers out of Belarus, claiming that this actually ended up deleting a whole bunch of data for them. So certainly we have at least some people claiming that this was something damaging. We've also seen on social media evidence of manipulated profiles and things like that, where images were generated not by, GPT-2, GPT-3, but by things like Clip. And you can see the telltale sort of signs of an AI-generated image where there are things like, an earring is only on one side or something like that. Various kinds of oddities around the corners of the eyes and hairline and things like that, where we see some of these things. And I think, honestly, there are more of these than we know, because if they're successful, then they're undetected. You have to be doing it quite badly to be detected there.
Yeah.
Sorry, one other thing, though. People are very, very good at doing these sorts of attacks on their own, and humans are quite cheap compared to somebody who can, play GPT-3 like a piano. It's easier to just hire 1,000 very low-paid workers and just hire them to do this and have them do this all the time. And it's way easier to train them than it is to train a ML model. So I think that's part of the reason. And I think as capabilities increase of these large language models, the potential for abuse increases because their capabilities outstrip that very cheap labor.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Bruce Schneier on the day-to-day benefits of improved security and recognizing that there's never zero risk.
In general, yes, I think computer security is a great way to improve the world, primarily because it is infrastructure. It doesn't do anything, but it enables everything else to be done. And you think about it, security is kind of a weird thing because nobody actually wants to buy security. What they want is not to have the thing that security prevents. I mean, I don't want a door lock, but I don't want to get burglarized. So the door lock gives me the not getting burglarized. So security is never a thing, but it enables everything else. It's core infrastructure. When you think about all of the promise of computers, from AI to autonomy and physical agency and all of the things, all the magic, all the technology, we want it to be secure. We want it to not have any bad side effects. And computer security is how we get that. So without computer security, nothing's going to work. With it, everything will work. So it's extremely important. So the neat thing about computer security is not that you're going to prevent catastrophe in the future, but you're preventing catastrophe tomorrow. And this isn't theoretical. This is real. I got real problems right now that if I don't solve, none of that future stuff's going to work well. So come join computer security, not because you're worried about the Terminator, but because you're worried about the iPhone. But these are still, all these machine learning security worries exist right now. We're worried about adversarial machine learning, worried about model stealing. Yeah. We're worried about algorithms that can't explain themselves or have veer off into weird side effects, or they embed existing pathologies like discrimination and biases based on the data we give them or the feedback we give them. I mean, these are all problems right now. And yeah, they're going to be bigger problems when these systems don't just make parole decisions, they make, left-right turning decisions billions of times a day in cars. But it is in a lot of ways the same thing. So the research today is extraordinarily valuable for the problems today, which will extend to the problems tomorrow. I will often get asked, how do I help? And one of the things I'll say is find an organization you believe in and help them. I don't think we need to optimize here, right? There are so many problems, so many areas in computer security, so many areas in sort of ways you're going to help the world. Pick the way that makes you excited to get up in the morning. I don't pick the one that's most optimal. We are literally all in this together, and someone's going to have to handle all the things you're not handling. So I care less what you're doing as long as you're doing something, because we all have to help or this is not going to work at all. So there's a lot we can do to increase the work the attacker has to go through. And that is worth doing even in a world where, yes, attack is easier than defense. Because there are no absolutes. This is all relative. So doing good helps.
So I guess if you're, Google, at the moment, Google DeepMind publishes basically everything. But in future, they might be wanting to keep their algorithms more secret because they think they're like either more dangerous or just more commercially sensitive. And they could imagine that they're forecasting that they're very likely to be kind of close to the top of the list for, something like the Chinese government wanting to steal like commercially valuable information. For someone who is likely to be kind of close to the top of the list, where it's like the things that they're stealing are worth billions and billions of dollars. Is it practical to hire some really great people and harden your systems against that, or is it maybe we just don't know where things will stand in 20 years' time?
We don't know where things will stand in 20 years' time at all. Certainly, it is practical to hire people. Google hires a lot of security people, and they have withstood government attacks. In 2011, they were penetrated by the Chinese trying to get information on Taiwanese dissidents. And they've done a lot of hardening since then. They were penetrated by the NSA, came out in the Snowden documents. Right? Then they've done a lot of work against nation-state attackers, and they consider themselves secure against most nation-state attacks, and they probably are. But yes, I think Google is spent a lot of time being secure against nations. Now, doesn't mean it's impossible, but again, there are no absolutes here. So there's a lot we can do. I certainly think that Google will get to the point where a lot of their algorithms will be kept as trade secrets. The obvious one now is PageRank, the algorithm by which they rank search. And that is secret for two reasons. One, because they don't want rival search engines to use them. And two, because they don't want
People don't know how to hack or how to abuse it.
Right, how to game
exploit
it, right?
Yeah.
They don't want optimization companies to figure out how to game the system. So you will probably see AI algorithms in that same boat. What we see now is that AI systems are all public, but training data and the resulting model tends to be secret. Again, those aren't secrets for long, right? And what security will come from moving fast, not from having, the secret pile. What is the state of the art today won't be state of the art 6 months from now. And you have to just assume they will get out. And I think the companies do.
I guess if you have something that you really want to keep secret, do you largely have to air gap it? I guess, the Iranians tried this with their nuclear program, and even that didn't work in that case. So they had a very, very concerted enemy there.
This is more complicated than the podcast probably can support. You keep something really secret. It depends what it is, right? If it's a small thing, you don't write it down. Or you write it down on paper. You don't put it on the internet. You don't put it on computers. Air gaps are just a very slow interface. We know that air gap systems are broken all the time. Actually, Stuxnet was designed to cross an air gap into the Iranian nuclear power plant. The United States has a air-gapped, private, classified internet called CyberNet. Actually, there are a few of them. And last time I saw writing, it's a few years old, and it's probably still true, that viruses tend to jump that air gap within 24 hours. Just because stuff happens.
Someone sticks a USB drive in.
Someone sticks a drive, someone takes a computer home, stuff happens. So air gaps help, but they're not a panacea. In the Snowden documents, there were any number of programs designed to cross air gaps and move data through air gaps. So, this isn't something that's going to solve things. If you want to keep something absolutely secret, there are things you can do, but largely you recognize there are no absolutes.
Holden Karnofsky on why it's so hard to hire security people despite the massive need.
It is kind of weird that this is an existing industry that many different organizations acquire, and yet it's going to be such a struggle to bring in enough people to secure what is probably a couple of gigabytes worth of data. It's whack, right?
It isn't. Well, this is the biggest objection I hear to pushing security is everyone will say, look, alignment is a weird thing. We need weird people to figure out how to do it. Security, it's just what the heck? Why don't the AI companies just hire the best people that already exist? There's a zillion of them. And my response to that is basically it's security hiring is a nightmare. You can talk to anyone who's actually tried to do it. When OpenPhil was looking for a security hire, I've never seen such a hiring nightmare in my life. I think I asked one security professional, hey, will you keep an eye out for people we might be able to hire? And this person just actually laughed and said what the heck? Everyone asked me that. Of course there's no one for you to hire. All the good people have amazing jobs where they barely have to do any work and they get paid a huge amount and they have exciting jobs. No, I'm absolutely never going to come across someone who would be good for you to hire. But yeah, I'll let you know. Ha ha ha. That was a conversation I had. That was kind of representative of our experience. It's crazy. And I would love to be on the other side of that as just a human being. I would love to have the kind of skills that were in that kind of demand. So yeah, it's too bad more people aren't into it. It seems like a good career. Go do it. There may come a point at which AI is such a big deal that AI companies are actually just able to hire all the people who are the best at security, and they're doing it and they're actually prioritizing it. But I think that point is not even now with all the hype, and we're not even close to it. And I think it's in the future. And I think that you can't just hire a great security team overnight and have great security overnight. It actually matters that you're thinking about the problems years in advance, and that you're building your culture and your practices and your operations years in advance. And because security is not a thing you could just come in and bolt onto an existing company and then you're secure. And I think anyone who's worked in security will tell you this. So having great security people in place, making your company more secure, and figuring out ways to secure things well in advance of when you're actually going to need the security is definitely where you want to be if you can. And I think having people who care about these issues work on this topic does seem really valuable for that. Also means that the more these positions are in demand, the more they're going to be in positions where they have an opportunity to have an influence and have credibility.
Yeah, I think the idea that surely it would be possible to hire for this from the mainstream might have been a not unreasonable expectation 10 or 15 years ago. But the thing is, we're already here. We can see that it's not true. I don't know why it's not true, but definitely people really can move the needle by one outstanding individual in this area.
Nova DasSarma on practical steps to getting into this field.
I guess I have this stereotype from the past that computer security is bad enough that a motivated 14-year-old who like, hasn't been in university yet, but just is really into computers, can probably do some interesting hacking, like break into systems that you'd be kind of surprised that they could get into. But I wonder whether that might actually be kind of an outdated stereotype, and whether like perhaps things have improved sufficiently that a 14-year-old actually might struggle to do anything interesting at this point. Do you know where we stand on that?
I think that stereotype is still quite accurate. And broadly, there is more software than there used to be. So a lot of the targets that were on that lower end of the security spectrum, there just are more of them. So I think that until we find ways to create secure systems by default, instead of having to do security as more of an afterthought, we are going to continue to see situations where a script kiddie with a piece of software that they downloaded off of GitHub can do a vulnerability scan and deface some website or something like that. I think it's a lot harder for them than it used to be to break into things like, whitehouse.gov or something like that.
Yeah, I see. So maybe the top end has gotten more secure as this has become more professionalized, but there's so many more things on computers now in general that the number of things that are not secure is still plenty.
Yes. And I think in some ways this is good. I think that like having systems that kids are able to break into is in fact a good thing. We've seen some really cool stuff in terms of there are websites where you've got a kind of a capture the flag scenario where you're meant to try and break into one level and then it gets to the next level, and then there's some key that you have to find for the next one. And these are actually really, really fun. And I think it's a great way to get kids interested in security. So I think that having systems that are targets, I would obviously not condone somebody trying to break into arbitrary websites, but certainly there are tools that are actually fun to do this with.
Yeah, how illegal is it to break into a website or something that doesn't matter that much, just as a matter of kind of getting practice and training and this, assuming you don't do any damage, whatever?
Very illegal, and you shouldn't do it.
Okay, all right.
But long story on that. So I would say that if you're interested in trying to do some kind of vulnerability testing, I would contact that website and ask them, because a lot of, Silicon Valley mindset is like, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Computer security and data loss is not one of those things.
Yeah,
so
it is a crime.
It is, yes, it is what one would call a crime. So I don't recommend it.
Right. But you're saying if you contact a random website and say, I think you might have a bunch of vulnerabilities, I am training in this, would you like me to try to break into your systems and then tell you what to fix? Enough of them will say yes, that this is a viable method.
I think not very many people will say that yes to you if you're not somebody with like a background in this sort of thing. And if you don't have a background in this sort of thing, then I would recommend looking at some of these capture the flag websites, some of these other sorts of things where somebody has actively set up a really interesting puzzle for this. And I imagine that the NSA has some programs around this if you're interested and on the younger end. So.
Yeah. If there's young people in the audience who are interested to get more, try their skills at this sort of thing. What resources can you point them towards? Is there a Hacker Monthly magazine or I don't know, a podcast they should be subscribing to?
So a couple of things that you might want to think about. There's a thing called the CVE, which is a centralized database for talking about various sorts of vulnerabilities in computer systems. Taking a look at the sorts of things that are there can be quite informative. Oftentimes they have exploits that come with them as a proof of concept, for being able to break into those sorts of systems. So that's a good way to get acquainted with the sorts of vulnerabilities that people do introduce into these systems. So that's one thing. There's a site called ctf101.org that talks about forensics and cryptography and exploitation and reverse engineering and that sort of thing. That's a pretty good resource. There's a thing called Metasploit, which is another database of exploits that you might want to look at. There are a lot of different kinds of capture the flags. Those specifically, I think, are really good. I think there's nothing like experience in many, many computer things. It's very easy to read about something and go, oh, that makes sense. And it's a lot harder to put it into practice. And having a system that's live that you can try stuff on where they won't call the police to your house is really good. So trying those is great.
We've talked quite a lot about kind of self-directed and organic ways of building skills. Are there any kind of more formal courses of training that people could use in order to build their skills, or is that maybe the wrong way to be thinking about it?
I think that those courses can be useful. If you're on the website of things, MDN, which is the Mozilla Developer Network, has some interesting stuff. I think that There are some Coursera courses out there that have looked pretty interesting, mostly on the ML side and less on the DevOps side. The best thing that you could do if you're in a university kind of role, you're in a good position to apply to one of these roles at a software company. Two things to keep in mind there. One, infrastructure is like super in demand, it turns out. I'm not sure why everyone isn't doing it, because it's the most exciting thing in the world and possibly the best thing that you could be doing. But that's in your advantage if you're interested in this sort of thing. I think there are fewer people that you're competing with compared to a generic software position. The one choice you might want to make is between something like Google, Facebook, Amazon, those sorts of like large companies where your DevOps looks pretty different from like doing something at, for example, a startup, where the work that you would be doing is very much greenfield work, very much working with tools in a more direct way. You'll get more mentorship at a place like Google, but you might learn slightly different things, and you might need to do more projects on your own to see if you can apply those tools. Because, for example, if you work at Google, a lot of the really hard problems have been solved for you. There's a lot of people working there, and there's a lot of tooling that's been developed to make it so when a software engineer wants to launch a product, they have a very specific thing they can do. Whereas if you work at, I did a bunch of startups. I've worked at a bunch of Y Combinator places, and every single one of them has been, from the ground up. You've got to, look at the problems and draw out a thing on paper and then, make that happen. And you can choose basically whatever tools you want. And it's just a very different experience, I think. But yeah, internships are a good place for this if you're so inclined. I do still recommend doing your own projects though, because I think there's nothing like that. If you're looking for more feedback, then that's where you want to launch, right? If you want to be able to, if you produce something that has users, those users will want things from you. And I think there's nothing like that.
Are there any sorts of people who think they're kind of not qualified or not suitable to work at Anthropic or in these kinds of roles, but actually are? Is that a phenomenon?
Yeah, I think we see that sometimes. I think the things that we're looking for are folks who are relatively self-directed and are able to pick things up fast. I think the biggest thing is like you might not have a huge ML background, but if you're a really strong software engineer, I think sometimes the ML is pretty easy compared to the software engineering problems, and you can pick up the ML. Jared Kaplan has a really good note that he has out that's, I think, really targeted at physicists about learning ML, but I think it's one of the clearest things out there on this. And so I think like it's, if you think that that's readable and you're otherwise a pretty strong software engineer, then I encourage you to apply.
Bruce Schneier on finding your personal fit in a range of security careers.
So if you want to become someone who changes the world by, hardening systems that are really valuable to harden, what's the best way to go about developing those skills? Imagine that here, maybe you're talking to a 25-year-old CS grad who has an interest in, some interest in computer security, but isn't working in it yet.
So I get the question all the time, and they always use the word best. And I tell them not to use the word best, because what you want is the career that makes you excited to wake up in the morning. And the last thing you want is to be told this is the best thing, and you're miserable, where the second best thing would be great. So find what you're excited in. Computer security is a very varied career. There are lots of different things you can do, ranging from hardcore math to hacking to policy and dealing with people and users, and figure out, what gets you excited. And do that, because you'll do way better for yourself and the world by doing the thing that excites you than doing the thing that might objectively better that doesn't excite you. But again and again, students always ask it in that way. What is the best way? What's my best path? You take a random path, right? Just wander through the space, do different things, see what's interesting.
What are maybe some promising options that people could take if they're excited by them? Are there any courses that are interesting, or is this something you really have to learn by doing it yourself on your own systems, or just get a job and learn on the fly?
Well, that's possible. We have something called cybersecurity skills gap right now, which basically means there are way more jobs than there are people to fill them at all levels. So yes, there's a lot of on-the-job training that goes on, where companies hire people with general skills and give them more specific skills in any aspect of computer security. There are lots of programs. Most universities have some computer security, either sub-degree or courses. So there's any number of ways to engage. And again, poke around and see what's exciting to you.
So I guess if there's such a shortfall of skills, then it's probably easier to get in on the ground floor right now.
And shortfall is even an understatement. I mean, hundreds of thousands of unfilled jobs. And that's just today. And that's just the United States. And worldwide into the future, there's going to be many, many more.
I find, this is my personality, but I find these computer security issues and looking at all of the vulnerabilities and people fighting against one another endlessly fascinating. I guess it sounds like you find this all very entertaining. Yeah.
I think it's the best field to be in too. I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah, I think I took a wrong path somewhere and studied economics. Yeah, so I've read this
but
article.
It's very funny. Economics matters a lot. I mean, my security problems actually are much more economic than technical. I have a lot of tech. Yeah. My problem is it's not being used. My problem is not being deployed. My problem is it's not economically sound for companies to use this tech. We have a conference, WISE, Workshop on Economics and Information Security, where economists and techies get together and do research on the economic models that drive computer security. So you think about something like, spam. Spam was a really interesting problem that had an economic solution. So spam was a huge problem. And then we all would have spam checkers, and they'd be on our mail servers. And they'd be pretty good and sort of not that great. We really wanted spam checking to be in the backbone, but the telcos had no economic incentive to deploy spam checkers at all. There was no upside, all downside. And that's where the problem lay, and no one ever solved spam. It was solved because the economics of email changed, and now there are only 7 email providers on the planet. So they were now big enough to tackle spam, to internalize the problem, and they tackled spam. And now spam is not a problem at all for anybody.
Yeah, even if they don't run. Yeah.
And that had nothing to do with the tech.
Yeah,
that was all the way the economic models of email shifted around. And we have lots of those. So I welcome economists in computer security. So if you ever decide that podcasting is not as exciting as you want it to be, you can come join us.
Costs and benefits tend to sneak in everywhere. Yeah, economists kind of colonize everything. So
psychologists as well.
Yeah, that's true. Social science in general.
The human interface. A lot of systems we have fail because of the people and the way this tech interfaces with people. So psychology and sociology are also extraordinarily important in my field right now. What we're recognizing is we're not building tech systems. We're building socio-tech systems, and that economics, psychology, sociology matter so much because they are core to what we're building. And this is different, right? 20 years ago, we were building tech tools. To now, you design Facebook, and economics, sociology, psychology matter just as much as the tech, if not more. And all those groups need to be together in design, implementation, maintenance, upkeep, features.
I guess it sounds like you're saying it's a very, very interdisciplinary field. It's going to have to be. But just sticking on the cybersecurity aspect for a second. Now, to prepare for the interview, I read this article, How to Build a Cybersecurity Career by Daniel Meisler. Have you read that? And if you have, did you like it? Now, are there any other kind of similar guides for people who want to figure out what first steps should I take if I'm really taken with this idea?
There are guides, and that's a good guide. I have recommended it to students who ask me, but I do tell them that they don't need a guide. That this is not like medicine, where there is a defined career path. It's not like law. It's not like accounting.
There's just a lot of ways in.
There's a lot of ways in, and there are so many aspects to it and different things you can do and such a demand that any way in is fine, that any path is fine, and that meandering around is actually beneficial. So I don't want people to be wedded to a guide and follow the guide. I want them to follow their curiosity, and they'll learn more and do better that way.
So yeah, it's interesting. So it seems like there's not enough computer security people, and yet it doesn't seem like it's that hard to break in if you kind of have the right mentality and you got your head screwed on. So there's so much demand that you can just play around in your basement, figure out a whole lot of stuff, and then try to go get a job. We harden systems. You can go to university courses. You can learn this stuff online. Why is it that there still aren't enough people, given that it's so interesting and it seems like there's not huge barriers to entry?
Have you met the world? Everything is so interesting.
Okay. There's a lot of competition.
There's a lot of competition.
Okay. But it pays so well as well.
So does designing video games.
Yeah, all right.
Right? I mean, so does doing everything. I mean, we are sort of, as a society, we have a lot of choices of cool things to do with our time. And there's no shortage. And I think doing computer security is a certain mentality, and that certain people are drawn to it and other people aren't. People who want to build and create things, you want to go into the stuff that builds and creates. In computer security, we break things, right? We tell you can't do that. We hack systems. We do things a little differently around here. And only there's certain kinds of people like that. I think a lot of people are drawn to the more creative and building aspects of tech. And that's fine. We need that too. There's no computer security. There's nothing to secure.
Yeah.
So it takes all kinds. Actually, it doesn't take all kinds. We just have all kinds.
Yeah, I feel like I might have the right mentality for this in some ways. Because like everywhere, I'm like obsessed with my own security. Just because I think when I'm going around doing stuff, I'm constantly seeing the weaknesses in all the systems that these companies have built. Like I had to reset my phone was stolen last week, and I had to reinstall the app on my phone. And I realized that everything that the bank demanded was only things that I knew and things that could be solicited through like social manipulation. So there was no like objects that I had to have. There was nothing that they couldn't get through a phishing expedition or just like calling up my friends to try to figure out stuff that they might know. And I emailed them and I called them and was like complaining about the fact that their security here was bad. To be honest, they probably might know more about the economics of this than me. That like if this was being exploited very much, then it probably the system wouldn't be designed that way. But at the same time, I was like, I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is a terrible system for resetting someone's phone access to their banking.
Oh, it is terrible. And hackers do exploit those. And yes, the banks and other systems don't fix them for two reasons. One is the cost of losses is cheaper than the cost of fixing. More importantly, the cost of losses to them is cheaper than fixing it.
Because it's a whole lot of time for you if you can get the money back.
But you, Mr. Economist, understand the notion of externalities. Yeah. Right? And a bank is not going to fix the problem if someone else has the problem. So, in 1978 in the United States, we passed the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And one of the things it did is it limited liabilities for credit card losses to the individual to $50. And this was a game changer in credit card security. Before that law, credit card companies would basically charge the user for fraud. Your credit card got stolen or lost, and you were stuck with the bill until like the 2 weeks, until the company could print the new little book with the bad numbers. When U.S. Congress passed that law, suddenly the credit card companies were absorbing all of the losses. They couldn't pass to the consumer.
And they fixed it very fast.
And but they did so many things that the consumer could never do. So think of what they did. Real-time verification of card validity, microprinting on the cards, and the hologram to make them less forgeable, shipping the cards and a PIN to the user in separate envelopes, requiring activation from a phone that was recognized. Now, if you're a user and you're getting those losses, you couldn't implement any of those things. But the credit card company could. They just never did because they never suffered the losses.
Yeah. Give the cost to the group that can do the most to fix the problem is just an obvious approach.
So we in computer security try to use that principle again and again and again because we have this tech, but it can't be deployed. It's not being used because the people who can afford the tech aren't seeing the losses. Whenever I look at computer failures, I always try to look at the economic reasons and then see where you can move the liabilities to a place that's consolidated so the solutions can be researched, purchased, deployed, used.
As I mentioned hours ago in the intro, if you'd like to learn more about impact-driven information security careers, then we've got an article on the 80K website titled Information in High Impact Areas. You can just Google the title. We've also got 91 InfoSec-related jobs listed on the 80,000 hours job board at the moment, ranging from more junior to more senior roles. And of course, you can set up email alerts to tell you whenever we add new ones. And you can also filter them for seniority, location, all of that. So you only get email alerts about jobs that you could actually apply for. You can find those at jobs.80000hours.org, and there's 825 opportunities listed on the job board in total just now, so plenty of non-infosec stuff on there as well if you haven't been convinced by this compilation to totally change your career and move into information security specifically. All right, thanks to the production team for putting that lovely compilation together. We'll be back with a fully new interview soon.